Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started. This week, you've got Mike and I here again. We're going to go through the monthly intensive, first ever here at LeanScaper. Thank you so much for joining. We're excited to bring this week's webinar to you. We're going to go deep into what the LeanScaper Balanced Scorecard is, how to use it, how to set goals to serve that scorecard. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. And again, we're not going to expect that all of these things happen in 3 hours. We're going to really set a plan for the coming month so that over the course of 4 weeks, we're going to deploy this balanced scorecard and really start to optimize the business in the 4 key areas so that your business is really just evolving over time with a little bit more care and concern into every area of the business. Because I think one thing I really learned in business is that I tend to keep fixing the things that I like to fix or the things that I'm really good at in business. And as a byproduct of that, I think I would often not pay enough attention to key things that probably should have been evolving. And so when you over focus on one area, you tend to kind of hit a new ceiling that you weren't expecting because you probably haven't put enough attention into other parts of the business. So we're going to kind of go through this balanced scorecard, explain how to use it. We're going to talk about budgeting and the importance of a budget. And then we're going to really start to talk about putting SMART goals into place that serve that balanced scorecard, and then using the balanced scorecard as a tool to just continuously improve on an ongoing basis. So again, you've got Mike and I here this week. Mike is the CEO of LeanScaper, and I am just the founder this time around. I'm going to try to focus on spending a lot more time in the community, working with contractors, getting out on the road, and Mike's going to look after all of the details and aggravating things that a CEO has to deal with. I think everybody here understands just how important that role is and how difficult it is to do. So, Mike, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself to those of the people that are here that may not know you.
Yeah, hey, I'm Mike, as Mark said, and this, proud to go through the aggravations on every day as the CEO. I've been trying to do that for a long time, but certainly first time in the CEO role. For those of you who haven't met me before, I was the CTO at LMN. Mark and I co-founded it back in the day. And then before that, I was Mark's director of operations for years at the landscape company. So been working with Mark for over 20 years now and continue maybe for another 20. We'll see how long this goes. But yeah, I'll be with you today. I'll be walking you through some of the documents. I'll be posting the links in the chat as we go through particular templates and stuff. It is, as Mark mentioned, meant to be interactive. So as we go through this, there's going to be lots of times where we're going to stop and we're going to work on things. While we do that, you're going to have a chance to work on them because I'll have the docs and the link. You can just click on them, go right there. And then as you're working through them, we'll be here on hand to take questions and answers and discussions and talk about things and hopefully make this session a really valuable 3 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And just layering on to that, we really do want to make this as conversational as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of people online here today, so we can't allow everybody to just jump in and chat. But what we definitely want is as much action in the chat room as possible. We're going to try to answer things that pop up in that chat as thoughtfully as possible as we go. So we're both going to be monitoring that chat consistently. We want to make this a very interactive monthly intensive. So we want to definitely hear your questions, hear your thoughts, hear your feedback. Please get as active as possible in that chat. That's going to make this 3 hours much, much more useful, I think, for everybody here. And as I said, we'll try to really go deep into the questions and answers as we kind of go through this session. Great. I think with that, Mike, why don't we just kick off and we'll get going with everybody. And I'm sure the questions will start to flow as we break out. Getting started, what we wanted to really focus on is this concept of continuous improvement. Really, at the core of LeanScaper is continuous improvement. One of the things that adjusted, I think, my mindset more than anything early in my career was being exposed to lean and really starting to understand lean as a set of principles. I think changed my own view on business, my own view on life in many ways, to be quite honest. And so this continuous improvement, Mike, can you just jump ahead there? The continuous improvement framework that I want to talk about is really, it's centered around this strategic planning cycle, or I've often called this a continuous improvement cycle. In fact, when you're in the community, you'll probably see it kind of get presented either way, strategic planning or continuous improvement. I've used this cycle everywhere in life. It just seems like anytime I've got a mission or a vision, really resetting the goals often enough that that becomes a reality, just it requires a little bit of a framework or a way of thinking. And I think in business, oftentimes we have this vision for our business, and it's super exciting, and that's what gets us out of bed each day, but we don't do a great job at really engaging everybody in our companies to really share that same level of understanding of what the mission is, why it's so important, and how it's going to serve their individual mission. And so I'd like to start here because I think it's really important before we start talking about goals and metrics and everything in between, that we just kind of talk about the human side of things, because I think sometimes people think of mission and they think of goals and they think of profits and all of these things as being something that, everybody understands. And it's really not that way. Like at the end of the day, every human has a mission. And you've probably heard me say this before, everybody in the world goes to work every day for themselves, and they're serving that mission. And that mission is often very simple and maybe not entirely documented because, I don't think we learn how to do this in school, but everybody has a mission. It might be to buy a house, it might be to get married, it might be to support their family, it might be to support themselves, but everybody has a mission. And I think it's really important when you start to build a mission for the business that you acknowledge that every employee or everybody in the company also has a personal mission. Now, when we acknowledge that and we understand that we're trying to serve everybody in the company, every employee in the company, we're just creating a mission or a shared mission together when we build a company mission. And so ideally, we've got a vision for the business. We know where we're going in 5 years and 10 years down the road. And we're going to go a little deeper into vision and mission this month, actually, as part of the weekly intensives. And so once we've unpacked that vision for the business, the very first thing we need to do is clarify what our mission is and what goals we're going to create in order to make that become a reality. Now, in my own career, and I think this is pretty common, many of us kind of get clear on that vision for ourselves, but we don't share the vision or mission very well with our employees. But then where we really start to fall apart is actually creating goals that our employees can understand and really connect to that mission. And so I think one of the key things that we want to really get good at doing and help people get really good at doing is building SMART goals that are connected to that mission. Now, once we've got the goals clear, and we've, 2 weeks ago, we went through this assessment tool with everybody, and we're going to come back to that here today. When we've got an assessment of the business and we've taken some input from everybody and we create some goals, the next thing that we're always going to do is we're going to create some strategies on how to drive those improvements. And I think most businesses do this. We do it in all different ways, and sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's not. But at the core of LeanScaper, what we're trying to do is help you create a shared mission for your company, create goals that people understand and that mean something to them, that are super relevant to them, And then what we want to do is make sure that we're just constantly talking about it. And so the meeting framework that we talked about last week was really designed for you to then take the desired outcomes and start to discuss those on an ongoing basis by creating strategies, and then just reflecting on how things are going by looking at metrics or results so that we can decide how to keep evolving the strategy. And so this little diagram for me, it's a great way of helping people understand that this is just a cycle that never stops. What we're really doing is we're always being as mission driven as possible. We're setting goals. We're going to meet every week or every other week or every month, whatever your cadence looks like. And we're going to really refine our strategies on an ongoing basis by involving everybody in the company in creating the strategy. And then we're going to talk about the measures using the balanced scorecard so that we can optimize the results over and over and over by always reflecting on the results and deciding what to do next. And what we're really trying to do here is just create this culture of continuous improvement where people don't hide from problems, but they actually come to the meetings each week knowing that the more they talk about the problems or the flow interruptions in the business, the more likely we are to actually do something about it together. And so what you end up creating, I think, is a culture of continuous improvement, but also a culture of trust, one where people show up ready to tell you what's wrong in the business rather than hiding what's wrong in the business. And I think oftentimes what happens is when we don't meet often enough with our employees, when we don't have clear goals, we just start to think that the employees don't care, and the employees start to think that the owner doesn't care. But neither is true. I think it's just miscommunication. So what we're really going to focus on today is the balanced scorecard and SMART goals. And we're going to talk about why those meetings are so important. And when you connect your mission, your goals, and your SMART goals to a meeting cadence, like the one that we've talked about, everything starts to really change in the business. And over the next 4 weeks with the intensives, what we're going to be doing is really making the changes in your company over the next 4 weeks for you to be a metric-based company that really leads with mission, reflects on goals, meets regularly to adjust strategy and look at metrics to just keep finding what should be fixed next in the right prioritization. Mike, we could jump ahead one there.
Yeah, sure.
Why don't you kind of talk through the approach to setting SMART goals a little bit, Mike? I think it'll probably be a good opener just before we kind of get into the details.
Yeah, for a quick recap here on what a SMART goal is for everybody, and just to reflect on maybe the employee side of what Mark was just saying. Certainly good for owners to make sure that they're communicating the objectives of the business. And sometimes it's deemed or thought of as something that's pretty stressful for an employee to put, numbers and results and revenue metrics, as an example, in front of employees and having them act on that. I'd challenge that to be the opposite. I think one of the most stressful things that can happen to a key employee is that they're accountable for results, but not responsible for necessarily driving those results or even knowing what those things are supposed to be. That's a stressful place to be when you're trying to make somebody happy, like an owner, and trying to do a good job and not really clear exactly what that good job is. And so what Mark was talking about, what a SMART goal does, is really make those objectives and those responsibilities clear to staff so that you can work towards achieving those goals, which also is going to make work just a little bit less stressful and I would argue for sure going to make you more impactful. So what's a SMART goal? It's basically a checklist or an acronym for setting a goal. And what it means is it has to be specific. So the goal isn't something like grow revenue. The goal is grow revenue by X. It could be a percentage, it could be a dollar value, but it's specific. Measurable means whatever goal we're setting is actually measurable. So oftentimes a goal like we want to be the leading landscape company in our market. That is a goal, but it's not really measurable unless we do something, right? If it could be, we want to be the first landscape company to come up on a Google search in our market. Well, that's something that could be measurable, right? We might have the top ranking. There's lots of other ways you could do that. Maybe we want to be the landscape company with the most revenue in our market. Great. That also is somewhat measurable if you could get other revenues. That makes things specific. Achievable is exactly what it says it is. We don't want to be aspiring to things that are impossible. We want to have things that are actually achievable as part of our SMART goal. It doesn't mean we can't set stretch goals. We'll get into that a little bit too, but achievable means it's a realistic goal that we should be able to hit. Relevant is an obvious one. It just means it's tied to our objectives. It's relevant in that if we do this, then those things are those objectives that we're shooting for are going to happen. And time bound is an important one too. And time bound is literally just putting a deadline on it. So it could be this week, this quarter, this year, next 3 years, but it is time bound in that. So now that I have a goal, I know exactly what I'm trying to do with the goal. We know how we're going to measure it. It's achievable and relevant to the business's objectives. And I know when we need to get it done by. So it makes the goal setting progress really clear and makes it easy for me as somebody who's responsible for that goal to make it happen.
Great. One question that just came in, will the slides be shared? Yes, the slides from this week will be shared in the community. So you'll be able to download those right from within the community. All right, so we are going to talk a lot about the balanced scorecard this week. This is something that we're really going to be working on over the next month. And so the balanced scorecard, picture this as your scorecard for the company or your scoreboard. You might want to look at it that way. In any sport, anything, any game, whether it's school, we always have a way of seeing our scores, whether it's a report card or the big scorecard at an NFL game. We always want to know whether or not we're winning. And when there's no scoreboard or scorecard, what tends to happen is people work a little bit less intense, or they're not really too sure what winning looks like. Because, if there's no way of keeping score, people don't really understand when they're winning and when they're not. And I think in business, it's really hard to just simply put one metric in front of everybody in the company and say, we're winning because of this one metric. And I think what I've seen all too often in landscape businesses, and I think even myself early in my career, I made this mistake. It was like, let's make revenue our scoreboard. Well, I found that the problem with making revenue as our only scorecard is people tend to think that if the revenue is growing, that the business is healthy. And I think everybody who's been in business for a few years quickly begins to realize that's not always the case. Yes, growth is great and it's healthy when it's profitable, but what if it's not? And, if it's not profitable, what is causing it not to be profitable? Is it actually, the pricing? Is it the productivity? Is it the type of customers? Is it that we're spending too many on expenses? There's just too many things to consider. And so what we want to really be mindful of when we create a scorecard is, what does winning actually look like? And how do we find a way to make sure that every employee in our company understands what winning looks like at the company level, but most importantly, they understand when they're winning and they understand what success looks like in their role. And so the whole point of creating a balanced scorecard like this in your business is to actually have a health check on the company, on a department, and on every individual by just simply putting together really simple metrics for the company, the department, and the individuals that they can understand. And if all of those metrics at each level are going well, then the company is going to succeed. And the reason that we like to put it into these 4 perspectives is because, as I said earlier, sometimes some of us tend to hyperfixate on one area or another. And, I'll give a few examples. And Mike, you could probably point out many from working with me throughout my career so much. I would oftentimes get really hyperfixated on one or two things in the business while the other things were getting worse or not growing at all. And so I'd oftentimes focus on financial. I'd start to say, like, we need to get more profitable, or we need to be growing revenue. And what would end up happening inevitably is we'd have all kinds of people problems because I'm just pushing, pushing, pushing for better profitability and more efficiency without really thinking, hey, did we do enough to actually help people develop? Were we doing enough for training? Were we actually making life better for our employees? Or were we just making it worse by being too focused on financial? Um, or, we get hyper fixated on a pricing project to increase the profitability, but we forget to invest in efficiency. And we're not really thinking enough about training our staff to work more efficiently or investing in the right equipment to be more efficient. And so where I'm going with this is it's very easy to get fixated on one area or another when you don't have a scorecard that's truly balanced. And market leaders, companies with incredible profit and incredible employee satisfaction and off the charts customer satisfaction and incredible efficiency, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens over a long period of time by being really focused on every element of the business. And I've seen these market leaders everywhere. We've spent time, Mike and I have taught workshops in just about every major city in North America. And what we always noticed is like the absolute market leader has just got this well-balanced perspective on the business where you ask them a question about the financial or the operation or the way they grow people or how they service customers, and they've always got these mindful answers or these great ideas to optimize each. And I think the balanced scorecard just helps you start to understand where you sit today. And then it kind of forces this behavior organizational wide where we're always doing things that make each area of the business a little bit better than it was the day before. Mike, is there some questions in the chat that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, sure. We can look through on the chat side, a couple of questions about just LeanScaper in general, and maybe some more like, is it appropriate for my size? And just very quickly, like as we go through this, there is no ideal size necessarily for these practices. Every size is an ideal size. Now, the depth at which you'll be going through these things is for sure going to be different for a larger company and a smaller company. But I think the stuff that's coming forward here, it doesn't matter whether you're a startup. In fact, it's a lot easier to get some of these systems in on the ground versus if you're a 200-person company. And obviously, they're going to have different results and you take them to different levels, but certainly applicable to all. And the people one, Mark talked about focusing on revenue, and that has implications with people right after. And then the people one has implications, right? So many things let's say you were able to solve some of your people problems and add people. That opens up a whole bunch of other problems that start. Do I have enough equipment for people? Do I have the tools? The first 5 to 10 people in a company, to your question about ideal landscape company sizes, might get trained pretty well because they work directly with the owner or under direct supervision from the owner. The next 20 or 60 employees are not going to have that same level of collaboration with the owner or whoever sets it. So having training processes in place to make sure those people deliver like it might not be a problem today on the smaller end of companies, but it will. You can't simply scale that for a company bigger. You're going to get too much separation between what should happen and what this employee knows to happen. So really, again, balanced scorecard just helping us make sure that as we grow revenue, we're financially responsible. We've got the cash flow to keep up with that revenue. We've got enough equipment to equip our crews with that. We've got the training in place so that we can continue to add people without necessarily them having that relationship with the owner or upper level management that they would have had before to do their jobs correctly. And then our customers are giving us feedback about that to make sure that we're still on track to do work as well as we did it before. All these things are really important to stay in balance.
Yeah, one question from Nicole. Yeah, this is available for everybody. So this monthly intensive we made available to everybody in the community just for this first one, so that people could kind of get a sense of what we'd be doing in an intensive and then what we'd be doing in the weeklies. And any companies that have already paid their membership is starting, their paid membership date of start, it starts after this last free one. So just for those of you that have already paid, you get this one for free as well, just even though you've already joined the community. All right, let's keep rolling. The understanding of this strategic alignment. What is it that we're trying to do with a balanced scorecard? I think this is really important, just as like some foundational information. When we create business strategy, if we don't have a way of taking our business strategy and actually creating some measurable outcomes for everybody in the company, then that strategy is just a wish. And sometimes I think, we get hung up on terms. Strategy is simple. I like to just take everything down to the most simple terminology, because when you're trying to work with a huge group of people, I think oftentimes they hear a word like strategy and they get nervous. And so I think it's really important to say two things here off the start. Culture is what we're trying to create with this program. And culture in your business, my definition of culture is super simple. Culture is just the way it is in your business. And so when you deploy LeanScaper, all we're trying to do is create a standard way. We're just trying to say, here is the way it is in our company. The way it is in our company is we use a framework in order to continuously improve. And so the culture that we're trying to create as a result of deploying LeanScaper is a culture of continuous improvement. So everything that we're building, every meeting that we're holding, we want you to bring more people to these meetings. We want your leadership team or your management team to be at these meetings each week and this intensive each month, so that we can create culture. Because I think what makes running business fun is having a culture of continuous improvement where everybody in the company is connected to trying to make the company better for each other and for the customers that you serve. And so really, LeanScaper is a tool that just develops a continuous improvement culture. So I like to say, when people ask me, what is LeanScaper? My one sentence answer is usually, it's a continuous improvement program. That's really what it is, if I need to put it into a few words. Now, that continuous improvement program has to be founded upon a theory. And that theory, for me, is lean. That's why we called it LeanScaper. Now, lean changed my life, it changed my business, it changed the way I think, and always for the better. I've yet to have found something that the philosophy of lean has really caused problems, because really all lean is a philosophy, is finding the simplest way of getting the best outcome. And so really what we're trying to do is create the best outcome for everybody, the customers, the employees, the shareholders or owners of the business, by taking all of the waste and all of the flow interruptions out of the business and really just driving improvements continuously that serve everybody for the better. And so it's pretty simple when you consider it that way. Now, strategy, sometimes people get overwhelmed by that word, but strategy is just, how are we going to make that happen? So if we want a culture of continuous improvement, the strategy is just the how. How are we actually going to get better each day? Now, the only way that I've ever found to get better is to understand where we stand currently. And that is creating some metrics in the business. And so today we're going to talk a lot about metrics. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure that everybody sees that clearly. We're trying to create a culture of continuous improvement where we take waste and we turn it into opportunity for more. More for the employees, more for the customers, and yes, more for the shareholders. And if we do that, and we do that continuously, we create a culture of continuous improvement where I think we can have a lot of trust, and I think we can actually go to work each day and still call it work. But what's really happening is everybody is actually making themselves better. Everybody's connecting, everybody's helping, everybody's building something greater than themselves. And I believe that that's where we actually find love and connection in our work. And so you'll hear us talk about that quite a bit. I think every human on earth is really seeking love and connection more than anything else. And when we go to work each day and we don't understand the strategy and we don't understand the mission, and we can't connect our mission of supporting ourselves and our families to the business mission, then it starts to feel a little empty. And then when we're just being pushed on metrics to get more, it feels even more empty. And I think what ends up happening is we feel disconnected from what we do for a living. And, I've been running my own business since I was 23. And I'll tell you this feeling of emptiness or loneliness at work happens to the leader just as much as it happens to the employees in the company if you don't have a way to speak the same language. And what LeanScaper is a common language. So ultimately, we're trying to create a common language in your business using metrics and using frameworks that just streamline everything so that you and everybody in your company speak the same language, and you've got a common mission, and you understand what good looks like, and you understand where there's room for improvement, and you meet so often that you get group flow, and together you build the culture that you actually want, and work starts to start feeling a little bit more like life. And then you've got this integrated life instead of this work and personal. And ideally, if this all works, everybody's going to work a little bit less and get a little bit more. And I think have a little bit more fun in the process. So what we're trying to do is take common challenges that we know exist in our businesses. We're going to try to build some strategy, some ways of overcoming them. And then we're going to make sure that we've got a way of measuring these improvements so that we can just keep getting better and better every day. We did have a question that came in. We're working with BTA at the moment. So just wanted to, this is a good question, and this has been coming up often. LeanScaper is not in any way, shape, or form meant to replace a peer group. In fact, I'm a huge believer in peer groups and mentorship. I think everybody should be in a peer group. I think if you're a CEO, being around other CEOs for a few days now and then and being held accountable by other CEOs can be an incredibly valuable thing to invest in. I do this to this day. I've never stopped. I'm a big proponent of it. LeanScaper is not meant to replace a peer group. LeanScaper is really an operating system. So LeanScaper is a way of operating a business. It's a continuous improvement program that you come back to with your entire leadership team and management team every week to deploy a little bit of an improvement each week so that at the end of a year, you look back and you've kind of fixed your biggest problems in the business. And, we fully expect this cycle to keep repeating itself. This isn't a one and done project, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, if you look at life the way I do. I really just see this as being a continuous improvement cycle that never changes. We go through 50 weeks and we get better. And then the next 50 weeks, we do the same thing again. And we're solving different problems and continuously evolving. So it's a continuous improvement process, LeanScaper, as opposed to peer groups are a little bit more specifically designed, I think, to allow CEOs to evolve around other CEOs, learn together, hold each other accountable together. Definitely a very different outcome. So love that you're in BTA, strong supporter of BTA and a number of other great peer groups. But thanks for bringing that one up. It's definitely worth chatting about.
Spencer asked too about
Mike, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I was just gonna, Spencer asked too about if this program's interactive or accessible for the staff. And that's the goal of what we're doing here, whether it's at in-person events or whether it's these webinars online or it's just the resources available. And you'll see we're gonna take these company objectives, even in this webinar alone, and distill it right down to staff to engage them. One of the goals of LeanScaper is that we're not just talking to owners and entrepreneurs. This, Spencer, you're more than welcome to bring staff for these kind of meetings, for our webinars. We would greatly encourage it. The events are designed, in some cases, for particular staff, not necessarily for the owner. The goal of this, or one of the things I think we heard a lot in previous iterations of our careers, is you could have a talk with an owner, and the owner's like, yes, 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 these are the things I need. That owner goes back to their business, and the message gets just watered down a little bit, not delivered the same way. It doesn't have the time necessarily to devote to putting the message. So the goal of these webinars and of the whole Leanscaping program is to collaboratively get everybody in the company together to allow access to this kind of stuff for everybody simultaneously. So the owner's not explaining all these things from scratch. The owner and the staff, as Mark talked about, either are creating a common language and a common understanding and common goals around these things so that we can leave here and we can all pull in the same direction without having to explain everything and remember everything that you learned at a seminar or, even worse, in like a 2-day event.
Perfect. Mike, why don't you carry on and kind of get into the why behind around the scorecard itself as a specific tool?
Yeah, for sure. So why a balanced scorecard? And the balanced scorecard, most especially around the 4 key areas we talked about earlier, ensures that we do things simultaneously and that we stay in balance. Think of it like a slightly more complicated yin and yang. But instead of the two, black and white, or masculine and feminine, if you want to look back like that, it is a 4-pronged approach to keeping your company in balance. We're going to look at things like financials, of course, because it's critical that a healthy company has good financials. Critical for the owner. It's also critical to pay staff good wages, to be able to buy the best equipment, to be able to have the best brand and get some of the best jobs. Those all depend on financial to some extent. But they also depend on, say, people, right? We also are probably not going to get a lot of the best jobs if we don't have the best salespeople, if we don't have the best craftsmen in the field, if we don't have some of the best marketing out there. And so we've got to develop people that are good at all those roles while we develop, say, things like financial. Operations is another one that has to then support those two things. So as we're growing the business, as an example, we're growing the people. Operations needs to have systems that gives those people the tools, the schedules, the plans, the feedback, so that they know they're all doing these things according to the plan. And last but not least, we certainly can't forget about customers, right? We could do all those 3 things well, but if we don't service the customers well, those things are going to fall apart really quickly. So the idea here is not that we're going to pick 1 or 2 things and go crazy at them, really try to grow revenue or grow net profits. The idea is that we're going to raise the tide of your landscape business simultaneously. These things need to stay in balance. If they get 1 or more get out of balance, you're going to struggle to raise this tide or to raise the level of your business. By focusing on a balanced scorecard, which looks at all the things that are critical to maintain good, sustainable success, that's why we're going to build a balanced scorecard. And also it helps engage everybody else in the business. Revenue is great, but if sales is the only department engaged in revenue, then we're going to struggle to make sure that operations and field staff and even finance people are engaged in making sure that revenue growth is healthy and that we're being profitable while we grow revenue. So that balanced scorecard, again, is the ultimate equalizer of progress to make sure that while we build up over here, we're also paying attention to the things that support that one area. And then on the other side, it's going to help, as it says here on the slide, leadership make data-driven decisions, but not just leadership as an owner, leadership in every single department of the business. So that could be a crew lead, for an example, but it's going to help us all make data-driven decisions, which again, I think is a really important part of taking some of the stress out of working for a company if you're an employee. And then certainly as an owner is going to take some of the stress out of trying to manage a company when you don't have clear indicators on whether things are going right. When we're saying things don't feel right or there's a problem with the cash flow, and so we're lashing out at things because we're not quite sure exactly where, it's stressful for everybody, certainly stressful for the owner, stressful for staff because they don't know what they're maximizing, but also then we're going to make knee-jerk decisions based on what we think is happening. By having a balanced scorecard, we can clearly see what are the things that we're supposed to be doing, how, to what extent we're supposed to be doing them, or what those scores should be. And then when things aren't happening the way we would ultimately like, we can look to which areas of those scorecards are clearly and objectively not hitting their goals. And then those are the areas we need to focus on. And part of that we touched upon in last week's self-assessment. Even if you don't have perfectly clear goals today, the self-assessment is going to start that to make sure we're looking at the right things and setting the right goals.
Great. We'll jump ahead, Mike. So one thing that we wanted to really talk about off the start was the importance of a budget. Now, those of you that know us know how seriously we take budgeting. The reason that we created LMN to begin with, the very first piece of software that we built was the budgeting tool. Now, budgeting is like this key component of success. 98% of small businesses don't have a budget, and oddly enough, 98% of small businesses don't get past year 4. Now, those businesses that do have a budget always end up being the most successful small businesses. And what we've noticed over the years, teaching as many contractors as we have how to budget, that budgeting process becomes this strategic planning event that really changes everything. Like doing a budget forces you to think through what you're going to pay your staff and what equipment you're going to have and how much overhead you can afford and what your revenue goals need to be in order to be successful. It just helps you strategically plan a year and say, well, hey, this is what success is going to look like before the year starts. And so I always try to get back to the first principles thinking and say like, well, why do I need a budget? Well, I need to know how much money that I have coming in so that I know how much money I can spend so that I can continue to invest in improving the business throughout the year and still be in business at the end of the year and end up with the financial outcome for every employee and the owners so that ultimately it's a success. And so the budget, the reason is simple. Now, what we want to do with this budget is we want to connect this budget through with our day-to-day behaviors. And this is something that we've tried to teach for many, many years. And I think it's one of these things that we've always wanted to circle back to, and we've always wanted to build this real-time awareness into the budgeting process so that every person in the company begins to see how they're performing against the budget. Now, think of the balanced scorecard as that tool. What we're doing is we've built a budget at the start of the year, and then we create a balanced scorecard for the company, for each department, and every employee so that they get to know if they're actually serving that budget. And now if everyone in the company is serving the budget throughout the year, and we're focused on improving the business more strategically in those 4 areas, we don't ever really kind of get ahead of ourselves in the sense that we don't grow revenue way too big without having enough people to do the work, or we don't make promises to customers that we can't keep, or we don't hyperfixate on growing top line sales and end up losing money. We just get more methodical about how we actually decide to grow. And so I think it's really important, if you haven't got a really solid budget in place for the coming year, that's definitely the place to start. Now, if you've never budgeted before and you need some help with that, definitely reach out to one of our guides. We've got a whole team of advisors that have signed up to be LeanScaper certified advisors to help companies with anything that we talk about week to week. And I think that this is an important component of what we're really planning to do with LeanScaper. We're not just coming here each week to tell you what you should be doing. We're showing you how to do it, We're going to give you the tools so that you can actually execute upon it. And if you're a little short on resources, maybe you don't have enough staff, or maybe you just need a little extra coaching, we've got that team of advisors to help you execute and actually get these things done so that you can stay on track with the continuous improvement plan that you've set up in the company. And now, if you ever need help with that, anything we're talking about, just reach out to one of our guides. We've got Dave and Aaron on the call here today. They'll both put their email addresses right here in the chat. You can get them anytime. They'll go through a business assessment with you, and then they'll help connect you up with the resources to actually execute on some of the improvements that you've identified. But they're both trained to actually help you create your SMART goals for the next quarter, and then help you create a plan to actually connect the dots if you're having a little bit of trouble keeping up. Now, this program, this 50-week program, is designed to help walk you through everything that we're talking about. But if at any point in time you're a little overwhelmed, or you've got maybe too many things that you're working on for one person or two people, and you just want to augment your team with some advisors or some extra resources, we've really built that out so that we can help you stay on track. Because I know firsthand, it's great to come up with a big continuous improvement strategy, but the first thing that often happens is resource constraints. So a couple things we want to talk about today is, first off, budgeting for strategic growth, and really how to do that. So we're going to open up a budget. We're going to use the LMN budgeting platform. Regardless of how you're budgeting today, maybe you're using spreadsheets or maybe you're using a different platform, we want to make sure that everybody has a similar view on budgeting. And we want to talk about how to budget for continuous improvement. Because again, one thing that we really both saw, I think, going through as many budget workshops, is we always noticed landscapers had no budget for advisors. They didn't have budgets for mentors or consultants. They didn't have budgets for training their staff. Oftentimes, there wasn't really a budget for continuous improvement. And oftentimes when I would ask contractors why they're not training their staff, or why they're not investing in better help on their leadership team, or why they're not hiring a true accountant maybe to help out in the office, whatever the bottlenecks seemed to be, oftentimes the answer was, I can't afford it. And what I really noticed while teaching so many budget workshops, they could afford it. They just didn't understand how to budget for it. And once the budget was built, then I really saw a lot of times people transform their mindset into, hey, I just budget for these improvements. My customers then pay for it, and my business gets better, and I'm building this enterprise value, this company that's very profitable, this company that is saleable, and a company that I enjoy running because I've put it in my budget. And so I really want to stress that importance. And we're going to take 20 minutes or so to work through a budget overview together and just kind of talk about some of the things that you should be putting into a budget in order to enable you to become a continuous improvement company. Because, the number one thing holding us back in life is typically our own limiting beliefs. We make up these stories ourselves. They don't necessarily have to be true. And this is really one of them. When you're budgeting for the upcoming year, budget for the mentor that you want. Budget for the staff that you know that you need to help you run the business effectively. Budget for the costs to go get advisors to help you optimize things like people and marketing and sales. And when you budget for it, your pricing is then impacted in a way where you're charging enough money to be the company that you want to be. And I always try to remind people that one of my favorite books, Steve Jobs, I talk about him a lot. Reality distortion in Steve Jobs' mind was like, here's what we're going to be. Now let's just figure out how to do it. Now, I think where a lot of people stop is on budget. They get wrapped up in, I can't afford to be that. And I think this budgeting exercise that we're about to do is your opportunity to put the money in the budget so that you can make the decisions each and every day this year with confidence to invest in the improvements that you know you need to make in order for your company to be the company that you really truly want to own. Hopefully that's compelling enough for you to hang on as we go through some of these recommendations. And we're going to give you a little bit of time with the team that you pulled up here today with for about 10 or 15 minutes after going through this exercise to just make some notes on some things that maybe you should be putting into your budget that either aren't in there right now, or maybe if you have yet to have created a budget, there are things that you can keep in mind. Mike, did you want to go ahead and jump in and we'll kind of go through an overview together?
Yep, I just pulled one up on the screen. Can someone just confirm that it came up? I just want to make sure Zoom's got it correct. Yes,
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, we're ready to dive in. Let's start on, I've got a sample budget here, and I noticed Nicole even asked a question earlier about financial benchmarks for companies of different sizes. And yes, Nicole, short answer, yes, we are looking forward to getting benchmarks there. More to come on that coming this summer, so watch out for that. But this is a decent sized company. We're looking at a company of about approximately 25 staff here as an example. And we're just going to go through some of the, not just the best practices of budgeting, but some of the things that Mark looked at as we built the budget every year. I learned a profound amount about investing in our own business and not having a scarce mindset as you go to grow your business and the results that it can yield. So we'll start with sales. We'll go through each one. We'll just talk about some of the things that you should think about as you build your budget and how to think about these things as they in terms of how they just grow your business, not just in terms of how much they cost.
Great. So again, we're just using the LMN software here as a template just to make this conversation simple. If you don't have a budget yet, feel free to reach out to one of our guides. They could point you in the right direction, get you a little help. If you've never budgeted before and you need some help budgeting, we can certainly help out with that. We're going to move fairly quickly through this budget today, but we also want to just kind of point out some things to consider when planning for strategic growth or when planning to really build a continuous improvement culture in your business, because it is really a sort of result of the way that you build your budget when it comes time to making the decisions day to day to actually drive these improvements into the company. We're trying to break that story. We don't want to believe that we can't afford to improve. We want to build the budget to support the plan. So on the sales side of things, generally, depending on the complexity of the business, what we're always doing is we're breaking down our major sales categories. We don't want too much detail in a sales forecast, but we also don't want no detail. And so here, pretty simple budget. We're working with a forecast of 1.725. Landscape install sales, maintenance sales, snow and ice, irrigation. We've got 4 major revenue lines. When we go to decide what revenue lines to put into the budget, generally speaking, we want anything that's significant. We don't want like service items coming into a budget. We want general lines or categories of revenue in here. Now, we're always trying to understand what the growth rate is that we're predicting. And so in this budget, we've got a difference. Now, that difference is telling us a lot of interesting things. And we want to make sure that as you start to think about becoming a metric-based company, that you're actually focused on some of these metrics because they're telling a story. And we want to always look at metrics as telling a rational story so that we can kind of almost debate with ourselves and when we're telling ourselves our emotional stories. And so when we start to say we can't do something, we should have a metric that's supporting that, that's rationally telling us why that can't be done. And so again, we're trying to use metrics to make rational decisions so that we can get outside of our own stories or, protect ourselves from making mistakes where we otherwise wouldn't really put enough emphasis on the decision. So we want to know the difference. Are we going to grow landscape install, or are we going to grow snow? Or is it irrigation that we're going to grow? And when we start to see these differences and we know where we're putting our emphasis on growth, it also tells us a few things. Number one, where do we need to start to grow people? Where do we need to really start to think about investing more in equipment? And, ultimately, where should we be doubled down on, focused on efficiencies? Now, if I'm looking at this specific sales budget, I'm starting to think really quickly that I need to put a lot of emphasis on efficiency and people in my landscape construction or install sales department. So it's telling me a story. Again, whenever we're looking at a sales forecast, we should be immediately saying, okay, if I'm going to grow my revenue by this, I've got to be optimizing my sales process, optimizing my people. Where are these leads going to come from? All kinds of questions start to come up just because of the sales forecast. So we want to use it as a tool. Now, we'll flip forward into the labor budget here for a minute and talk through this a little bit. I think it's really important that we talk through some of these metrics up at the top of the page. Mike, why don't you kind of explain what the metrics are, what they mean, why they're so important, and why these metrics are going to make up key components of the balanced scorecard?
For sure. So we'll go through some of the labor metrics, and one of the first ways, I know Mark saw this 100 times, 1,000 times probably, because you hearkened back to it last week, and I found the same thing often. Just to touch on here, because it'll dovetail into labor in a second, there are multiple ways we can raise sales. One is doing more work. And oftentimes you'd see people look at something like this and be like, oh, I don't know if I can do that much more work. It's not always, though, doing more work. And certainly to some point it is. But how else can you raise revenue? Well, we can raise revenue by raising our prices slightly or doing work that has a higher revenue per hour. These are things that are going to make a difference when we get into field labor. And we can certainly get more efficient at what we do. We can save all kinds of downtime and non-productive time or time falling behind on jobs, and also use that to raise revenue. So there are multiple levers. A lot of times when you think about raising revenue, the knee-jerk reaction is sell more work. Sometimes that is the answer. But also sometimes it's about just being more efficient or charging more for the work that we have. That'll get us higher sales numbers without necessarily increasing some of the things that we're about to touch on right now. Labor being the absolute biggest one. So if I go through here at the top and look at things, labor burden here is going to be your percent of cost that you're going to add to your payroll to cover things like insurance and taxes and workers' comp. Your overtime multiplier is simply going to make sure that we've budgeted to recover some of your overtime costs, assuming that in a normal year, you're probably going to work some overtime. Of course, if you don't, you leave your overtime hours at zero. The other things that we're going to get to that start to become even more important are things like the total hours, what our total wage costs are, and then what our field labor ratio is. And this field labor ratio is, to me, the most fascinating number I think I learned from working in Mark's company than any other one. And what that really did, I'll try to create a story around Mark's own business. And when Mark and his key people back in the day were running and growing the business, you had like Mark and family members involved. And so sure, they paid themselves more than the average crew lead would, for example. But our labor ratios were actually quite good. And why? Because they were hyper productive when compared to the average crew lead. So even though the wages were significantly higher than the average crew lead, so was the output. So was the revenue earned, because they were banging out jobs a lot quicker. Why? Because they cared, because they had control over everything, because the jobs were well planned, because they were on site every day, all those natural things. But what that's meant to say or show you or have you think about is, when you're thinking about labor costs, of course, payroll cost is a factor. But what's a bigger factor is what percentage of your revenue you're spending on your field labor payroll. And that's what this number is telling us here. So if you want the exact formula, it's your wages, not including government remittances, workers' comp, and all that, divided by your revenue. And so that is the percent of every dollar you earn that goes to pay the people in the field. And there are two ways And obviously, or if it's not obvious, you'd like that number as low as possible. That means we're the most efficient. The less of every dollar we spend on wages, the more efficient or the more money left over there is for profit. However, it's a number that isn't necessarily just driven by wages. Sure, if I have low wages, I might have a lower field labor ratio, or at least that might be your thought. But it doesn't always work that way. If I have low wages and a very inefficient workforce, what ends up happening is, even though we have low wages, we have a higher than average field labor ratio. We're spending more of every dollar earned on payroll. Why? Because we're not generating very much revenue. And that top line revenue is far more impactful on things like field labor ratio and your net profit than the cost of the wage themselves. And this is where I said, I think I learned one of the most important lessons in business back in the day at the landscape company, when the first year we raised crew lead wages by about $5 an hour. And so at the time, that was quite shocking, right? Wow, are we going to be able to afford these people? And it's a big jump. And the hope was that we were going to be able to recruit and find and keep better crew leads, hopefully from other industries that had experience. When you think about it in the big picture,
Hey, Mike.
yeah,
I just wanted to point out one thing just for everybody here, just as you described that. The field labor ratio in its most simplest form is just a percentage of revenue. I just wanted to make sure everybody sees that. So 22.9 is a percentage of revenue. So what that's saying is for every $100 that we invoice our customers, we're spending $22.90 on field labor. So it's just the ratio to revenue. I think we didn't quite start out by describing that. It's an important. All of these ratios are always to our total revenue.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for calling that out as well. If I passed over that. That is also why it's so important, right? As our revenue, what percentage of our revenue is going to pay the crew lead? And the lower that number is, the more efficient we are at generating revenue. And as I was talking about the wage increases, instinctually, you would think big increases in wages, like $5 an hour, are going to have a pretty negative impact on my field labor ratio. It's going to make it a lot harder to have a good field labor ratio if I'm spending a lot more on payroll. But if you can attract better people who are better organized every day, who take better care of the equipment, who train their crews better, who communicate better, who think and run their jobs more consciously and thoughtfully, then what ends up happening, if you think about the example I just gave you, $5 an hour is about 10,000 a year. 10,000 a year is a small front yard, right? It's a small, so if that crew can generate more than one small front yard in the entire year because they're well organized and because of all the other reasons we talked about, your field labor ratio actually starts to get better. In that case, it comes down. We spend a smaller percentage of our revenue on wages, even though we're spending more on wages. And that's where you start to build a really exciting and really profitable business, when you can have a business that pays crews more than the regular average wages and yet still thrives and grows successfully, because as a company, they're generating revenue that far exceeds what the extra is that they're spending on wages. And now we have a company where people are paid better, the company does better, the company can outbeat its competition on efficiency and not just on costs. And we get a whole lot of other flywheel effects going there. So as you go through the field labor budget, I challenge you to think of things like, what are we spending today on wages? And what's my field labor ratio? And if it's problematic, as I see maybe a couple, hey, if it's red here, it means you're significantly higher than the industry average for your type of work. I want to call into play here on the very first screen of the budget. We're going to break your work down. And this is broken down by revenue earned from design build, revenue earned from maintenance, revenue earned from irrigation, and revenue earned from snow. The reason we do this, and the reason why it's important, is because when we get to things, most especially the field labor ratio, this industry average ratio over here, so the number beside your ratio is the industry average. That's showing you that what on average companies are spending for or with a similar mix of work. It's not a generic average, because obviously a design build company is going to spend a lot more as a percentage on materials than a maintenance company. So, and then on labor, it's vice versa. A maintenance company is going to spend more on labor than a design build company because most of what you do is labor and there's not a lot of materials. So by breaking your work down here, what you're giving LMN is the input to understand what your labor ratio should be. And if you're above the industry average ratio, the best way to look at that is I am less productive at generating revenue, or our crews are, than the average industry company that does the same amount of work as I am. If you're lower than the industry average, that's a good thing. We're spending less of every dollar on wages in the field. And that would tell you that you're more productive than the industry average company that does that mix of work. So if I want you to make sure you pay specific and careful attention here on the budget info, because your mix of revenue here, what you're doing here is basically saying what percent of our revenue is coming from design build, coming from grounds maintenance, coming from your, and then that will set the tone for what the industry average field labor ratio is for companies just like you. Then you can benchmark your spend against the industry average. And the landing point here for, I think, the biggest learning lesson, it's not always about reducing wages to improve this. In fact, that's probably the wrong way to think about it. The best way to think about it is, what could I do here that will empower my staff? And here and other places, we'll talk about this when we get to equipment. The other funny thing is we don't just fix labor ratio by payroll. We can actually fix labor ratio by better equipping staff, by equipping staff with more training, by having more systems and processes in place designed to help our staff get productive. We're going to go through some of these things as we go through the other categories. Mark, anything more to layer on to labor?
No, I think, the big takeaway here, the reason that you need a budget, and today we clearly can't go through an entire budgeting workshop, and so we're going to be moving fast here. What we're trying to highlight is, if you don't have a budget, we have to make sure that we help you get one. And so if you're really experienced with using LMN, or maybe you're using QuickBooks or an Excel template, you've got a budget, and at the very least, that budget needs to be able to surface some key metrics. This key metric of 22.9% is really important, because this is telling you how much you're going to spend on labor before the year starts. Now, we want to know what that percentage is against the industry average. And then what we're going to use is, we're always going to be using that industry average as a feedback mechanism, so that you know whether or not you're spending more on labor than you should be based on your mix of work, which is where Mike was describing the work breakdown. I think what we really want to be clear on is ratios. Ultimately, we want to know, are we spending 20% or are we spending 40% on labor as we produce our revenue? Because this is our efficiency metric. And I think oftentimes people don't really see the field labor budget as being the guide that tells you whether or not you're efficient. If this number is at 22%, and the average for the industry is at 25, then it tells you that you're more efficient than average. If this number was 29%, it would tell us that you're a little bit less efficient than average. And this is where these metrics really become useful. We want to be as simple as possible in what we're looking at, and we want to know, are we efficient or not? And so the industry average tells us the guide, and our budget tells us our actual, and it tells us where to focus our efforts. Again, if you need some help, just reach out to one of the guides. We'll get you hooked up with an advisor to help you get through that budget and really build a budget that serves your own business. Let's hop into equipment for a minute, Mike. We better pick up our pace here on the budget overview if we're going to stay on track. Equipment budget, we're not going to spend a lot of time here. What we want to talk about is building out an equipment budget for an efficient company. So when we build the budget for the coming year, what you should be always doing is putting in the equipment that you know that you need to buy or lease for the business in order to hit the goal that you've set for the coming year. And we want to put the equipment in the most effective way possible, which means we want to consider, should we be owning it? Should we be leasing it? Or in some cases, should we just be renting? And so what we want to do is we want to build out a plan here in the budget to have all of the right equipment to do the work most efficiently. And then we want to see how that ratio looks against the industry average. So again, if the industry average based on the work breakdown of this company is 13.5, then if we're only spending 11.2%, that's fine. It's not a problem. But we also want to be kind of mindful to think, well, we probably do have a little bit of extra money in the budget if there's some other tools that we think we could buy or lease and leverage to become more efficient. And what we've noticed over the years, particularly in our own business, was when we were starting to notice our equipment ratio dropping, where we weren't spending much on equipment, sometimes we were seeing the labor increasing, which meant, hey, maybe we haven't invested enough in equipment so that our labor can work really efficiently. So we like to kind of look at these two ratios together and say, if the equipment ratio is low and the labor ratio is high, we probably should be considering spending a bit more on labor saving equipment so that that labor ratio can come down. So we start to see these patterns develop with these ratios. And that's why it's so important to have these metrics, is so that we can see, hey, we're spending too much on labor and not enough on equipment, or vice versa. Maybe we've got way too much equipment for the size of our operation. But again, when we've got the budget, we've just got that level of insight. We can jump into materials next. And again, this is just a sample budget. These metrics can't hold true for every company that we have. Mike? Are we good?
Yep, we're good. We're in materials now.
Sorry. Yeah, my screen went a little off there for a second. So the materials budget for your company, again, based on the work mix that you actually have in your business, try to segment the materials one of two ways. I like seeing it either as a breakdown by material category. So you can see here it's materials installation, materials maintenance, materials snow and ice, materials irrigation. Now, in this scenario, what we've done is we've aligned the materials for each division or each revenue line to match the revenue line items. That gives us a pretty clear way of running reports later to see how profitable installation is versus maintenance versus irrigation in our accounting software, whatever accounting software that is. Or, if you're using a system like LMN where there's a detailed job costing platform, you can also run your expenses and job profitabilities there. Now, I really like looking at it segmented this way. What we see is a lot of companies, when they're budgeting, just create one line item that says materials. And then in accounting, there's just one line that says materials. Again, that makes it hard later for you to get a more metric-based approach to looking at each division. So just a little tip before entering into 25, create a couple of extra material categories. It's not any extra work for the accounting team. They're just going to be applying a code to the material receipts that are coming in from each division and making sure that we've got divisional materials. It just makes it much easier to look at how profitable your install department is versus maintenance versus snow or irrigation. It gives you that granularity to start to really fact check how profitable things are after the fact. Next up, subcontracting. The subcontracting budget, there is no right or wrong ratio here. Some companies do a lot of subcontracting, some do very little. We're not saying one is right or wrong. And so you don't see an industry benchmark here because there is no benchmark. Every company is different. And so what we're really trying to understand here, though, is what percentage of your revenue is being subcontracted. So we want to see how much you're spending as a ratio to revenue on subs. And so you can see here, this one is really small. We're only forecasting to spend 1% of revenue on subcontractors. Now, if this was a 50% number, that would skew a lot of our other expenses, like our equipment and our field labor. If we were spending a lot on subs and subs were performing half of our work, then we definitely wouldn't be wanting to spend as much on field labor and equipment because other people are performing the work. And so we just want to get to know these ratios so that we can comfortably plan our expenses. This one's a pretty simple budget for most to go through. The big one that we're going to work on here is overhead. And this is where I think most companies really lack the confidence in investing in continuous improvement, is the overhead budget. So we're going to open up the overhead budget and we're going to talk through a few key areas where we think you can really budget for the continuous improvement that you're going to have in the coming year. Now, overhead is this elusive thing that many of us are afraid of. And when I was like early in my career, my way of getting lower overhead was not investing in the business. And, you know, it almost happens a little bit accidentally, in the sense that you learn how to run numbers, you learn how to run a budget, and you find out that as an industry, if we can kind of keep overhead below 25% of revenue, then we're going to be really successful. And I remember hearing that number from a business consultant saying, hey, if your overhead is 25% or less, you're probably going to be competitive on price and you're probably going to be able to be profitable. Now, as soon as I heard that one metric, I started to make decisions based on keeping that metric below 25%, which is this overhead ratio. And again, just to clarify what these ratios mean, all of these ratios are as a percentage of sales. So this is us saying, for every $100 that comes into the business, we're going to spend $23.90 on these overhead expenses. Or at the end of the year, 23.9% of all of the revenue that came in is going to fuel all of these expenses. Now, overhead is really quite simple. It's all of the things that our business needs to be in business, all of the things that we need to grow and improve, and all of the things that we need to have in place to optimize people, optimize our customer experience, optimize the profitability. And they're all of those things that we need, but we don't actually charge our customers directly for any of these things. So I think naturally, as business owners, we tend to be a little bit cheap when it comes to investing in these areas of the business, because we don't actually charge our customers directly for these things. So we kind of think of these as being almost like the thief of profit. And I know myself over the years, every time it takes a lot of training to teach yourself to start to think of overhead expenses as the thief of, or not thinking of them as the thief of profit, but actually seeing these overhead expenses as being the investment in the business. And I think that's a really important distinction, and it does take a little bit of a shift in mindset. Our overhead investments are where we actually grow the business, where we grow people, where we actually build out a tech-enabled landscape company, where we protect ourselves with great lawyers, with excellent financial advisors, with great marketing teams. This is where we invest in our shop so that we can operate really efficiently, where we build great websites. These are all these important things that really differentiate you between the best company in your market and the ho-hum companies. So in order to really get better, we have to be good at budgeting overhead and being mindful about what we're investing in. And what we're going to do with the LeanScaper program is, throughout the year, we're going to actually use the money that you've put in this overhead budget to make your company get systematically better 1 week at a time throughout the year. And we're going to fuel that by putting enough money in this overhead budget at the start of the year to pay for all of your continuous improvement exercises and still be profitable and still pay best wages in market and still pay yourself fair wages as a business owner. So we're trying to systemize continuous improvement, and we're trying to systemize it first by making sure that your budget sets you up to be able to afford to do these things, because otherwise you end up with this criminal's dilemma each day where it's like, do I do the right thing for the business or do I go out of business? And we can't have that way of thinking going through your mind throughout the year and hope that you're actually going to stick to a continuous improvement plan like LeanScaper. So we want to make sure that we get this right. Now, Mike, why don't you talk about a few of the key expenses that we've seen missing over the years off the start? And, we'll kind of go through the expenses, overhead wages and overhead equipment individually. But Mike, why don't you kick off with expenses? And then as we roll into the wages, I'll jump in and share a few thoughts there.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the expenses, as Mark mentioned earlier on the top, that are you don't see missed are things like utilities and rent and office supplies and that kind of stuff. But it tends to be as Mark talked about it earlier, right? When we think about the term continuous improvement, the overhead budgets tend to be a baseline amount that it takes to operate the business, and not really a lot invested in, say, a continuous improvement process or anything that's going to help advance the business from where it is today to ultimately where the owner and probably the staff want it to get to. And so some of the expenses that like labor, have a cost, but have a short-term benefit, or a short and long-term benefit to the business, where sure, there's a cost here, but the increase in revenue per hour, per year, et cetera, will typically far outweigh the cost, would fall under these categories. Training being the single biggest one, I would think. If I was to think back to all the budgets I've seen over the years, which is over 5,000, training is oddly not on most of them. And so when we're dealing in an industry where labor is generally everybody's biggest problem, where turnover is a problem, so we're constantly bringing new people in, where there are safety issues, and where it's not that hard to train people how to do a job well, and certainly that runs the spectrum of, like, say, mowing all the way to, say, fine carpentry. There's certain skills that for sure take a lot hard, but a baseline training expectation of how to train equipment, how to get out of the yard, how to work safely. These things are super important for our industry because we face these things every single day. So the fact that not a lot had a training budget, pretty concerning. Also, when you echo the fact that most owners, I don't know how to get my staff engaged in the business, or I don't have anybody who's engaged my way. Training is a part of bringing that all together and having staff not only learn how to work safely and learn how to do their jobs properly, but also learn how the business runs. And there's some great examples of that, whether it's us taking the time once a week in the morning to talk about lean and introduce those concepts, to having people take online training courses before they even started to understand the basic tenets of lean or the terminology, so that when a new staff started at TBG back in the day, they understood what the word waste meant. We weren't often talking about what was in the disposal bin. We were talking about inefficiencies, or what the words 5S meant as an organization system, and how that impacted where we put everything every day. So that's a big one. Some other ones that are missing often would be something like a fractional CFO service. I know a lot of, in fact, there's some chatter even in the chat about the numbers that we can actually see out of our company. And most companies, like over 90%, if you're looking at people coming into the budget, were set up by, at least from an accounting perspective, maybe a family member, and maybe an accountant, maybe just QuickBooks wizard, but they never had a conversation about what we're trying to get out of this, or what we need to track, or how this might influence estimating. And so what we get is an accounting package and almost no metrics, an accounting package designed to help us pay taxes and run an end of the year statement. It's not necessarily designed how to extract the key health indicators out of the business and give them back to us in a way that we can improve. And that can be a simple fix. So Mark, you talked about earlier, other services. And sometimes it's about I just don't have the resources, so we need to scale up. Other times it's also about I don't have the expertise in these resources. I may have a resource, but not necessarily the expertise. And so one of the best things you can do, sometimes even before you need that resource or as you're just needing it, is to take that first step and bring somebody in who really understands what it needs to look like, so that you're not building it this year and then fixing it and fixing it and fixing it or working around it for the next 10 years. You build it right at the start. And if that's a little investment at the beginning, it's usually well worth it. And then HR services is another one. Again, everybody's biggest concern: people, keeping people, turnover. And so we're an industry that honestly doesn't pay enough attention to HR services and to taking care of those people. We're so used to turnover and lack of engagement that it just becomes an accepted way of doing business. And we have to fight through those problems every day. And so learning how to engage HR services to help us hire better, interview, get better candidates in the door so that we're not turning people over and having to do all those things as often can be an easy payback.
Great. So, the major components that we see overlooked oftentimes, we kind of put right to the top of the list here. Just not investing in staff training. We can't expect that we get an entire company on a continuous improvement program without investing in people. So typically what I try to recommend, about 50 to 100 hours per employee per year for training should be built into your overhead budget. And so this is you actually just saying, okay, our average wage in the company is $25 or $30 an hour. We're going to work 1,000 hours this year, or we're going to allot, 1,000 hours a year this year on training for all of our employees combined. And we're going to put that cost here in the overhead budget. Now, ideally, if you've got 50 to 100 hours per employee, that's going to give you time for continuous improvement training meetings. It's going to give you time to actually give people training on how to use equipment, best practices, give them lean training. It's an opportunity for you to actually create the meeting cadence that we talked about recently and have money set aside in the budget that we're charging our customers for throughout the year in our pricing, so that we're not opposed to spending time at the shop or office doing meetings. Now, this is a little bit hard for people to wrap their head around sometimes because they're thinking, I don't want to be back at the office. I want to be out producing revenue. The nice part about putting the cost of training in your budget, it then gets marked up when you're putting pricing together. And therefore, what's happening is when you're sitting at the shop doing training, you can start to see that as revenue generating time because your customers are paying for it built into the pricing. And what are you doing? You're actually building the skills and the depth and the alignment in your company by having meetings, by having training. And so you're getting better, and you are actually therefore producing more revenue every hour for the rest of the week. And how did you pay for it? It didn't come out of profit. It came out of the markup. And I think it's a pretty important thing to really put it in the budget at the start of the year so that you don't ever see training as a cost, but you see training as a revenue generating activity. Every meeting should be something that's producing more revenue, and it is when you put it in the budget this way. Okay, let's hop over to overhead wages for a minute, Mike. I think just we'll pick things up here, but ultimately, overhead wages, I can't stress enough how important it is for you to put the roles in here that are needed in your company. And we're going to talk a lot about org chart in one of the upcoming weeklies here. I'm going to describe the org chart in detail. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk through org design so that as you're building a budget, you're actually putting the wages in the budget for the needs that you have at your current size. Again, one thing that I saw a lot when we were teaching budgeting is a lot of times people were trying to have no overhead wages. So they didn't have that incredible office manager. They didn't have that accountant that they might need, or they didn't have that ops manager that they really needed. Sometimes because they didn't know they could afford it, and then other times just not really understanding how to put it into the budget so that it translates into pricing throughout the year. And so as we go through the next few weeks, you're going to really have that opportunity to build out an org chart that serves the business not only this year, but as the business evolves over the next 3 years. I really believe that an org chart is a strategic tool. It's a continuous improvement tool. It allows us to design a leadership team that can continue to scale, and the budget really supports it. So again, once you've built that org chart, I want you to really come back and build your overhead wages out accordingly. So we'll leave it at that, I think, for a deep dive on budget today. Next up, I just want to review the profit and loss together. Oh, sorry, Mike, I meant the, yeah. A lot of the metrics that we talk about in the balanced scorecard come from your profit and loss. And so whether you're using the LMN profit and loss or you're using one from QuickBooks, ultimately what we're trying to derive here is our gross profit, our net profit. We want to understand our overhead as a percentage of sales, our labor, our material, equipment, and subs, all as a percentage of sales. And so on this profit and loss statement, you get a chance to see exactly what your percentage of sales are. And this ends up becoming that benchmark to let you know how to use a balanced scorecard to really optimize the business. So we'll hop into the balanced scorecard discussion here next. But what we want to do is we want to kind of give you guys a few minutes here to really just go through some things that you should think about when it comes to building your budget or updating your budget just based on some of the things we talked about. We want to give you 10 minutes here right now, 5 to 10 minute break. Grab a fresh coffee, have a bio break, and with the people that you're here with, we just want you to kind of make a list of a few things that you think you need to revisit in your budget for the coming year. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that budget is closed and we've got a plan for the coming year. And we want to make sure that we've put enough in the budget to build out that leadership team, to invest in staff training for continuous improvement, and potentially a few advisors that you might need to help really optimize the business or optimize you as a leader in the coming year. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Go ahead and make that list of things that you think you need to budget for in the coming year so that your customers pay for this continuous improvement program that we're trying to deploy. All right, we're gonna get things back underway here in just a couple minutes, but thought we could just answer a couple questions just while people are getting back to their seats. Had a couple good questions come in. One really good suggestion is the LeanScaper standard chart of accounts. You can access that chart of accounts from within the community. We'll make sure that we actually post that with the chart of accounts today for everybody here to use. That often helps people clean up accounting. If you take the standard chart of accounts that we present in the community and you bring that to your accounting firm and ask them to take a look at the way that you've been doing your accounting and align the two, it'll probably really help with the budgeting process in the future. Sometimes people have created their own QuickBooks account and started out without a lot of thought in terms of how to structure that chart of accounts. We've got a great standard to work to that just makes that a little bit easier in the future. So again, great suggestion that came in earlier from Austin. Estimators was a question. Estimators and designers are definitely overhead staff in most companies. If your designers are out doing, let's say, some plant layout or even some planting and installation and site work, you might end up splitting their wage. You might have part of their wage as overhead and part in the field labor budget if they're doing some billable work. But generally speaking, we recommend putting designers in the overhead budget. That's a good question that came in there. All right, we're going to keep rolling. Mike, do you want to pop back into the other deck? So again, if you've never taken a budgeting workshop, we've got some great budgeting workshops coming up. Some of our certified advisors are holding budgeting workshops. We'll definitely be pointing to those through the community over the course of the winter. So if you've not actually gone through a budgeting workshop or a budgeting process in the past, stay tuned on the community. We're going to be announcing some budgeting workshops that some of our advisors are holding for a one-to-many or group workshops, both online and in person. And of course, we also have advisors that can work one-to-one and help work with you to go through a budgeting exercise. And LMN is always available for you to start up an account and build your own budget. So you could always look to the LMN team to help with that as well. Mike, I think we ended up on yep, there we go. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is the business assessment tool. Now, over the last week, we reviewed this. We talked about this in our weekly. Now, the reason this is such an important tool and the reason we started with this so early is we want you to have this assessment finished before we jump into the February weekly sprints. Now, this call today, we're setting ourselves up for 4 weeks of sprints. And the way that LeanScaper will work, for those of you that join the Accelerator program, you come to a 3-hour intensive like this each month with your leadership team. And then what we do is we talk about what we're going to do in this next month, and then where we're going to kind of drive the improvements is each week. So every week, we're going to switch topics to one of the 4 components of the balanced scorecard, and we're going to put some improvements in place in the business that allow you to optimize the business. Now, whether you're a small startup or a multi-branch enterprise company, it's going to be applicable because the tools that we give you in your groups are going to be designed for the size of company you're at. And so if you're a starter company, you're going to get different tools and resources to deploy than if you're a big enterprise company. And so if you're sitting here saying, wow, this looks like a lot, I'm just a small startup, or hey, I'm really big and I already do this, bear with us a little bit. This first intensive, we have to kind of wrap everybody's mind around a process, which is you need a budget and you're going to use a balanced scorecard to stay on track to that budget. Now, this assessment tool that we gave out earlier last week, it's designed to help you understand where your strengths and weaknesses are in your business. And we believe that you should be able to go through this assessment on your own to assess the business, but we also have our team of guides at your disposal to help take you through an assessment. When you join the program, the paid program, that guide is going to work with you every quarter to go through an assessment that allows you to see where your business is at, and it helps you reset your SMART goals for the coming quarter. And what it's also going to do is help our guide help you seek out the resources, the tools, any documents, any SOPs, any frameworks that you might need in order to self-activate, or maybe even help you match up with an advisor that can expedite the process for you. So this business assessment is designed primarily for you to get a better feel of your business. And what we want to do with it is then create SMART goals that actually drive continuous improvement. Again, the quality of the SMART goals is the key. Most people set goals, but the goals aren't set in a way where they're actionable enough. And I don't think they do a great job at actually cascading the goals out toward others in the business. So again, we'll just scroll through this form really slowly here for a minute. We wanted to double down on what you're doing as a company to grow revenue and profit, and just score yourself accordingly. And so maybe you've already done this. We did release this in last week's session, and maybe you haven't. The point of this exercise is to score yourself and then create a list of improvements in each section that you think would be some quick wins or things that would drive the highest return for the least amount of time invested. And so I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. What we're trying to do here is assess how you're doing at growing revenue and profit, and then say, hey, what's the top 2 or 3 things that we could do in this next quarter that would actually drive revenue and profit? And those become the SMART goals. And so sliding on down, the next section we covered was growing people and skills. Now, again, here what we're just trying to say is, where do we stand right now in terms of growing people and skills? And when we score ourselves, we get this realization. And then what we're trying to do is now say, what are the 2 or 3 things that we could do here that would set ourselves up for long-term success and still have some immediate impact on the business? Same with operational efficiency. We're doing the same thing again as we move forward. We're going to go through each section of the business, and we're just scoring ourselves from 1 to 5. Customer experience, best brand in market, and we're saying, at the end of the day, here's our score in each category. And I think it's really wise to categorize it, because it allows you to look and say, hey, listen, we're kind of a 5 out of 5 on efficiency, but we're not doing much to improve our brand. Or we're a 3 out of 5 on growing revenue and profit, but we're a 0 on growing people. And therefore, maybe it's the fact that we're not growing people that's actually holding us back in these other areas. So what we're trying to do is create balance. And so we need this assessment in order to really help you understand where you're probably not putting enough emphasis in your business as we start to kick off a continuous improvement program like LeanScaper. Because what we're doing is every week, we're actually going to focus on one of the 4 perspectives. So next week, we're going to talk financial. The week after, we're going to talk about growing people. And every week, you're getting tools, resources, a lesson, and the actual SOPs to go make that change happen in your business. And so what we're trying to do is methodically improve the business 1 week at a time by giving you these little bite-sized pieces to deploy in your business. What we're trying to cover here today is, if you use the balanced scorecard, it's going to be measurable. And so We'll just scroll down to the bottom of this document just to remind you of what we were trying to do here is we were trying to get an overall score. And then what we wanted you to do was actually build your own list of improvements for your business that could be turned into SMART goals. So Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview? Maybe show that list that we came up with. I think, was it the sample of the assessment? So here's a sample assessment. This was an assessment of an actual company. And so what they did was they went through their assessment and they scored themselves, and they listed the employees all completely confidentially, scored in each area. The owner got a chance to score themselves, and all the employees got a chance to score themselves. And then we came up with a scorecard for the company and then made a list of improvements off to the right. Mike, do you want to just show the list of improvements that we came up with here? So came up with a list of improvements that led to SMART goals up above, which let's go up to the SMART goals that we created. So when we come up with the improvements, we plug those into ChatGPT following that command that we gave you. Now, what we're looking at now are actual SMART goals that are tied to the results of that survey. And this is what our guides are trained to help you do. So this may seem like a big exercise for you, but they want to teach you how to do this for yourself. And so what we're trying to do here is we're basically taking the results of an assessment and we're building a big list of things to do. Now, these are not Hidden Creek's SMART goals, by the way. I think Mike put Columbus on here. It's going to look like it's Hidden Creek, but it's actually not Hidden Creek. I'll say that off the start. This is another company that I work with, but not Hidden Creek. Okay, Mike, why don't you walk through some of these SMART goals and we'll keep them at a high level, but give people some examples of just how actionable these become for a business.
Yeah, for sure. So I did pick Columbus because apparently it has the highest per capita rate of contractors. So I thought it would be
that's
maybe
why.
the most anonymous. But that's how I ended up there. All right. So yeah, again, SMART goals being being a way to implement it. And I want to harken back. I think we'll get into that in a minute. If I can just go back to this thing for a sec. One of the exercises we did last week on Wednesday was to take those areas of concern from the self-assessment and create SMART goals from them. And one of the best ways you can do that is using that prompt that is below here. Oops, that's below here on the screen. And I can actually paste that prompt there in a second if I can get out of presentation mode here. Put it right in the chat for those of you who missed last week if you'd like to try that. Now, again, you should have first your self-assessment done. Once you have your self-assessment done, now you've got some areas. Using this in, say, ChatGPT or any other GPT-like interface, type this prompt and put your low-scoring areas in here. And what it will suggest for you is a list of SMART goals. And so the SMART goals that were extracted from that survey that we just looked at would be things like this: implementation and process optimization. So that's the high level goal. Now inside that, let's look at our specificity and measure. So the goal is fully implement LMN in the Columbus branch, ensuring accurate estimating, scheduling, and tracking. So is it specific? Yes, we're deploying it. Is it measurable? Well, how are we going to measure it? 100% of estimates and schedules here are created in LMN by March 31st. Is it achievable? Yes, we're going to do some training. We're going to do check-ins. Is it relevant? Yeah, it's going to support our goal for profitability and overall efficiency of our operation. And when are we going to have it done? By the end of Q1 2025. And then underneath that, there's some key actions to take. And you'd be so surprised how well something like ChatGPT can create these for you. Going down here, another way to increase revenue for this here is to increase some service line profitability, especially in, say, maintenance and irrigation. So noted a problem here, or maybe not a problem, but an opportunity. So we put that in here. Now, profit margins by X, could be 5%, could be 10%. And then how are we going to do that? Well, let's look at what's profitable based on our estimates and our job costing. So we can get out of tools like LMN exactly what our job costing results are from the jobs we finished last year. Then tweak our prices and resubmit our proposals to those customers so that we can make sure we're capitalizing on any estimates or contracts that we've got that aren't necessarily profitable. And then also improve operational efficiency. So you'll note that one there as well. And then again, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. It's going to go through these steps to make sure each one of the goals that it's creating satisfies all these conditions. We also want to scale revenue growth here with aggressive targets and stretch goals. So you can see here big goals for organic revenue growth, growing by over 50%. And then how do we do that? And again, we're going to go through some locations here.
Oh, just Mike? I'm good.
Yeah, you're good.
I don't know what happened. It looks like Mike froze. I will pick up where Mike left off. Hopefully he comes back in. He was running the screen there. But we ultimately, with these goals, what we were trying to highlight is what SMART goals really truly look like. When you're actually trying to build goals that other people in the company can own, what is really important is the ability to actually explain what key actions are going to make that goal happen. I think this is where oftentimes people really struggle when they set goals, is the goals are so high level that people end up really not knowing what to do in order to make that happen. And so, oftentimes goals stop at the top line, like improve leadership and employee development. Well, just simply saying we're going to improve leadership and employee development doesn't really solve anything. It's just a goal. And I think the whole world is filled with people that have goals that look like that. The difference is when we actually make it a SMART goal, we take it to the point where we say specifically what we're going to do to actually drive this improvement. And SMART goals always get specific. So our goal is, yes, to strengthen the leadership team, but we're going to be specific. We're going to say we're going to update job descriptions, we're going to develop the individual growth plans, and we're going to launch a career ladder program. Now, it's measurable because we're going to do this before March 31st. And we know that it's achievable. And we know that it's relevant because we can't possibly get to our next growth phase without it. And we're going to make it time bound by saying we're going to get it done by March 31st or the end of Q1. And so this goal becomes really clear. Now, the key actions are saying we're going to issue our job descriptions by February 28th. Then we're going to develop and share a career ladder before March 15th. And we're going to also update and document the SOPs. Now, this would be an example of something that we'd be working through with the whole group here at LeanScaper as part of our weekly sprints. What we'd be doing, though, is we'd be providing you with the tools and resources so that you don't have to create the job descriptions. You just download and tweak. You don't have to create individual development plans. You download and tweak. And so it makes it much easier for us to get you there before February 28th, because you go into the LeanScaper library, you make the changes, and then by the 28th, you've got that system finished and you're staying on track with your SMART goals. Now, where a lot of business owners oftentimes really get bogged down is they get this heavy feeling that all of this needs to be them. Or they feel overwhelmed by the fact that they can't share these goals in a clear way. And so this is why we really believe it's so powerful for you to use the assessment framework that we gave you and either do the ChatGPT SMART goal setting on your own or have our guides help, because what we're trying to do is give you something that can be handed off to others in the company. So what we want to do is we actually want to take SMART goal number 4 in this case, just as an example, and we want to assign that to somebody. Maybe that's the office manager in your company. Maybe it's the operations manager, or maybe it's a vice president if you're a bigger company. But we want to make sure that we assign this to a person or to a group of people so that it actually happens on time. And then using the weekly meeting cadence that we talked about in our last meeting, we're using the weekly meeting cadence to talk about actually making these things happen. So oftentimes, I think what people find when they're doing regular meetings is they don't know what to talk about, or they just talk about whatever the leader wants to talk about. And what I was really trying to share with the meeting framework is what we actually talk about is we start by looking at the balanced scorecard, and then we talk about our SMART goals and how we're trending on the goals that we've made with the initiatives that we're working on to support that goal. That is what we end up talking about in the weekly meetings. So if you try to think about the meeting cadence as being the delivery mechanism for the improvements of the SMART goals, then the meetings carry a lot more importance. We use a balanced scorecard to measure, we use the SMART goals to execute upon, and we use the meetings to talk about how we're actually going through these improvements and what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that's where we get collaborative to drive the improvements. So the three really go hand in hand together. We've got a strategy that we've created, and what that strategy looks like is we've got a list of SMART goals, and now we meet using the meeting cadence to make that become a new reality. And we just use the balanced scorecard as a way of keeping track on how all of these improvements are trending in the business. It's really important to kind of see how those three things intertwine. Now, here's an example. This is actually, Lucky's on the call here. Austin, I thought I'd share your meeting cadence. Hopefully that's okay. I always ask first, but I happen to have Austin in town last weekend, and we were working through his actual company meeting cadence as part of our meeting. And this is what we really came up with as we were kind of talking through it. And I really thought that he put a thoughtful approach into creating his. Now, what we're doing is we've got a balanced scorecard to talk about metrics. We've got SMART goals that connect up to the meeting cadence. So as we worked through this meeting cadence last week, we didn't really talk about what this is going to look like in your business. It's really important that everybody builds a little framework like this for their own business. Now, in this case, at Lucky, they're going to have a leadership team for 2 hours every week on Wednesdays. And you're going to talk about the balanced scorecard and the SMART goals for the company at a meeting like that. Then there's going to be a monthly team meeting, there's going to be a quarterly team meeting, and an annual team meeting. And so the leadership team has a meeting cadence every week, every month, each quarter, and each year. And there's a different agenda for each. And again, this meeting framework is something that we've put into the community. You can download it, make it your own, build your own little cadence like this. But ultimately, I think this is a really excellent example of mindfully putting together that plan. Who's going to be at the meetings? How long is the meeting going to be? How often? What day of the week are we going to do this meeting? And then what we do from here is we take this and we put it into our calendars with recurring meetings, with recurring invitees, and we just make it happen. You know, where we spend our time today dictates our future. And when you avoid meetings and you don't have recurring meetings, you have no delivery mechanism for continuous improvement. So again, your continuous improvement program entirely hinges upon your ability to have recurring meetings with the same people and use the same agendas and talk about the same things over and over and over again. And the balanced scorecard and your SMART goals are those things that you talk about. I can't say enough about the value of recurring meetings, a balanced scorecard, and SMART goals, because that becomes the backbone of your continuous improvement system. Now, this may seem like a lot to hear all at once in one online meeting, and we know that. When you're part of the LeanScaper Accelerator program, we're going to work on that every week. So again, we're building a muscle. We don't expect this happens in 3 hours or in 2 weeks. We're going to get better 1 week at a time by talking about the key things that actually drive improvements and then giving you the tools and resources to make it happen in bite-sized pieces. In order for that to happen, you've got to have a meeting cadence like this in place in the business. You can see the leadership team's meeting, but then also each functional team's meeting. So in the case of Lucky, he's got a construction and enhancement team with a director. He's got a maintenance team with a director, an irrigation team with director, and agronomy with a director. So there's 4 directors across 2 branches, but we need to have meetings with each of those directors each week to talk about what we're doing to improve the balanced scorecard results and what we're doing to activate on the SMART goals in each of those departments. Because what we end up doing is we build SMART goals at the company level, SMART goals at the department level, and SMART goals at the crew level. And what that ends up being is every level of the company is doing things to improve that serve the company plan. And so it's really important that you've got these meetings in place so that there's actually a continuous improvement mechanism. The meeting is the mechanism. LMN and LeanScaper are 2 completely different companies. Somebody was asking if when you implement LMN, if LeanScaper is included. They're very, very separate from that perspective. Okay, let's say what I want everybody to kind of just take a few minutes to work on right now. If you think about the improvements in your own business that you're trying to make in the coming year, I just want you to, we're going to just take 3 minutes. I want to make this a super fast exercise. I want you to write down the top 3 things that you want in the business in the coming year. Maybe you want higher profits. Maybe you want more highly skilled workforce. Maybe you want better customers. Maybe you want better equipment. We can keep it fairly high level or fairly detailed if you've kind of been working on this. But I'd like you to just make a list of the things that you want most for the business. And ideally, if you've already done an assessment, those are going to correlate with that assessment tool that we gave you. And if you haven't, hopefully as a follow-up to today, you're going to go through that assessment and create a little bit more meaningful list. But right now, I'd just like you to reflect on those few top things that come to mind that you're trying to really change or improve in the business. I'm just going to give you a 3-minute pause here to do that. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk through that a little bit further. All right, we're going to hop back in here in 1 minute. Just give everybody 1 more minute. Feel free to share as many of yours as you'd like up in the chat. I always love when people share their wants for the coming year. It usually creates some good discussion. It also helps other people improve their list. And, ultimately, community is what this is all about. We're trying to get better together. So sharing some of the things that you've come up with in your list will be super valuable for everybody. More money, more equipment, and less stress. I like that one. All right, we're gonna jump back in. Mike, if you could advance, we've got lots of good action happening in the chat. All kinds of really good ideas. I love seeing all these smart or all of these goals that will turn into smart goals. Okay, so what we want to talk about now is when we take all of this list of things that we all want to do in our businesses, what we need to do is we need to find a way to see if all of these ideas are actually driving improvement in the business. And I think when we're looking at financials and we're looking at job costs and estimated versus actual hours, and we all have these metrics that we use to drive our businesses forward, sometimes we overlook the importance of balance. And that's really, I think, why we really want to teach people how to use a balanced scorecard. There's just not enough balance in most businesses for the business to truly get better. We tend to fix one thing and then the other, and then we get one thing running smooth and we realize there's something else broken. The balanced scorecard's designed to really help you see the interconnectedness of everything. Your financial results are only going to improve when your operational efficiency improves. And your operational efficiency is only going to improve when you learn to invest in training and you learn to invest in systemization, and when you learn how to hire better people and then take the time to train those people on how to actually operate more efficiently. And so then, we have to have the right customers for all of this. At the end of the day, we have to have customers who are looking for quality, who are looking for the highly skilled company that say what they do and do what they say. And so we have to optimize that customer experience. And if you're always focused on one area or the other, sometimes you just miss the leading indicators or the things that are likely to actually change the game. And that's really what we want to learn or we want to share and teach others how to learn. Really, what we want is your company to be systematic about improving financial results through efficiency, through growing people, through improving the customer experience and upgrading the customers that you work for. It's a real process. They all come together and become important. And so it's not one metric. I cringe sometimes when I comment or I write about the most important metrics in the landscape business. And it's often a topic that you see on LinkedIn or Instagram, where what's the most important metric? The truth is there isn't one. There isn't one most important metric. You've probably heard me say before that revenue per hour is a really big, important indicator. And it is, because with revenue per hour, I know when I see really high revenue per hour that a company is likely to be selling high profit work. They're likely to be able to pay their staff a little bit more. They must be fairly efficient if they're getting more revenue per hour. That means they're getting more work done per hour. Again, depending on the type of work. But it's just an important metric. It's not the only metric. And so what we want to really think about is, how do we look at more metrics without overdoing it so that we can actually systematically focus on fixing each important driver in a business so that the end result is really good for everybody, the employees, the customers, and the business owner. And so the balanced scorecard does that. This is definitely, I think, the most important thing that I learned in my journey to grow a top 100 company and to grow LMN. All of the success that I've had came from systematically focusing on every part of the business and growing the business in a more balanced way. In my younger years, I went all in on revenue, and I just about crushed myself and crushed everybody who worked with me. And as I got a little bit more mature and I started to get better mentors and better coaching, and I started to realize that the haste to grow is actually, the most damaging factor, I really started to learn that being balanced in the approach of growing a business changes everything. And fast is maybe not always best. Sometimes slow is fast and fast is slow. And so where we want to focus is growing the right things at the right time. The balanced scorecard tell us that. If our employee metrics aren't strong, then we're likely to have financial metrics that are going to be weak in the future. If our customer's not happy, our financials are not going to be happy. If our efficiency is not so good, our financials are not going to be so good. And so we want to be focused on everything, and we want to make it simple. And simple is power. At the end of the day, we lose track of everything when we overcomplicate it. So we're going to walk you through the balanced scorecard and explain just how we keep it as simple as we do. Mike, why don't you go ahead and explain that next section so that I think everybody gets a strong handle on the balanced scorecard before we go through. We can skip this exercise, I think.
Sorry, I had my mic off. Sure. So what we're going to do is look at the balanced scorecard, and we'll go through each one of the components individually so that we can look at some of the simplest and most important things to track there. So again, to go back to the 4 components, the LeanScaper operating system, we're looking at financial, we're looking at operations, we're looking at people, which is kind of like HR, and we're looking at customers. So those 4 things. There are other things that we talk about in the other one, like brand recognition, but for now, we're going to focus on those 4 as being core to our internal operations. So let's start with some financial metrics that are simple and realistic to track. And we're going to look at them across 2 different categories, one being leading and the other being lagging. And it's really important as well to have a balanced scorecard. So you're looking at things across the organization equally, but we're also looking at metrics inside the organization and inside each one of those components equally as leading and lagging. So what does that mean? Leading indicators are behaviors and things we're doing before we know the results in anticipation of achieving the results that we're hoping to get. So for example, if your target was revenue, a leading indicator might be leads in the pipeline. It could be average estimate size. It could be average estimate gross profit, as you see on the screen there. Those would be things that we're doing ahead of whether we know we've sold more or sold less, but they're behaviors that we're doing that we think will lead to us selling more. And then we also want to balance that with lagging indicators. Lagging indicators are metrics that let us clearly know whether we're succeeding or not because they're looking at after. We don't want to have all lagging indicators because by then it's too late. So if we said, hey, we want to grow revenue and all our indicators were around, or maybe we want to grow financial success, but all our lagging indicators were around, all our indicators were around like revenue and profitability and net profitability. Those are all things that have already happened, and they're not telling us what to do to make those things happen. So as we go through each one of these sections, we're going to look at the balance of that because it's important to have both. Arguably, leading would be slightly more important than lagging. Leading tells you what you're going to do to make it happen, and lagging tells you whether it's happening. So both are important. When we look at financial, some of the key metrics that we might want to look at a very simple level are things like estimated gross profit. And you may decide to break this down by division. It's often helpful to do so, as certain divisions will have higher or lower gross profits than others. But estimated gross profit is a target that's helping us be a leading indicator, because it's saying if we're estimating work at these gross profit margins, then we're likely to achieve the profit and ultimately the revenue that we want to achieve on the back end. Things like estimated revenue per hour, same idea, is another leading indicator. If we set clear revenue per hour benchmarks for every estimate that goes out the door, again, you're going to want to have differentiation there by division for sure. Things like design build are going to have a higher revenue per hour than maintenance, because you got a lot of materials baked in those. But once you have those numbers, then setting a standard for your estimates is driving the behavior that's going to improve our financial results. Knowing what our estimated revenue per hour isn't necessarily a better metric, but it's going to help us do the things that are going to end up with a better metric at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year. Another important financial metric is overhead ratio. And why is that important? It's couplefold. One is to make sure that we're growing or changing the management part of our organization commensurate with our sales. We don't want to have too little overhead if we're falling apart. It means we don't have the right structures in place to keep the field efficient. But certainly we don't want to have a lot of overhead, which is what commonly happens to companies that don't have good systems and don't have good processes. They end up just hiring more people to manage, and then the overhead gets high. And when overhead gets high, profits get low, but also your gross profit margin has to change, because you got so much overhead. A lot of it has to contribute to your overhead recovery, and therefore out of net profit. Now, lagging indicators could be your actual gross profit. So you can look at things like reports out of your LMN job costing to see, well, what are we actually grossing on these jobs, and then making sure it's at or equal to our estimated gross profit. Another lagging indicator would be revenue growth for key financial metrics. I noticed a lot in the chat, people had growth, year over year growth. So revenue growth, especially growing versus last year, is another easy to measure and common lagging metric for financials. And then other ones might be things like EBITDA, especially if I'm focused on perhaps enterprise value of my business, or maybe selling my business in the next 3 to 5 years. EBITDA not only tells us about profitability, it also can be a strong number when it comes to valuating your business down the road. Which is absolutely one of the things we want to help you do over the next couple of weeks. Mark, anything more to add to financial metrics, or?
I think sometimes we overcomplicate this in conversation. I've definitely found that business owners often are a little bit apprehensive to start to teach their staff some of the key financial metrics. And I can explain it in 1 minute on a simple sheet of paper like this behind me. And I think I'll do it right now just to highlight how simple this really is. When we start to look at metrics on a page like this, if we could keep that up, that'd be good, Mike. It looks like a lot. And, I think when you think about sharing this type of information with your employees, it seems complicated, but it really isn't. I'll show you how simple it is. When you talk about revenue with your employees, is that easy enough to see? Can you zoom in on that, Tony? Maybe a bigger marker. A little brighter. Revenue. When we talk about revenue in the business, if we bring in $1,000 on a project, if you don't talk to your employees and explain to them that there's a lot of expenses that come with the $1,000, I think sometimes people make the mistake of assuming that you're making $1,000 when you're charging your customers $1,000. And so I always say that if your employees haven't actually received a little bit of training, then they're going to assume that the business is overflowing with money. But when you go a little bit further and you try to help people understand, I think they understand the business very differently with a basic explanation of revenue. For every 1,000 that comes in, I'm going to spend $250 if my labor ratio is 25%. and again, that's why these ratios are so important, I'm going to spend $250 on labor. And then if my equipment was 15%, then I'm very simply going to spend $150 on my equipment. If my material is 10%, I'm going to spend $100 there. It gets very, very methodical. And so if I kind of add up the math and I get 500 or 250, 3, 4, 500 in my direct costs, these are my estimated costs. Now, generally speaking, when we're pricing jobs thinking labor, equipment, material, and maybe subcontractors as well. But if my direct costs are $500, then all I'm adding next is my overhead. So if my overhead is 20%, then I know that I've got $200 in overhead, and that gives me a $300 profit after my overhead. When we start to look at these ratios, it helps us understand our business in a way where we can actually start to optimize what we're spending on labor, what we're spending on equipment, what we're spending on material. But most importantly, we begin to get this confidence in spending on overhead, spending so that we can have the best accounting, spending that we can have the best salespeople, we can have the best operations managers, we can have people helping us hire better people and train better people and grow the business. And so it gets really important that we understand where the money's going in the business in order to optimize the business. And likewise, we want to make sure that everybody in the company understands this. And so it really is this easy to build crew budgets. You're just simply showing your staff, we've got revenue, we're going to spend 25% on labor, 15 on equipment, 10 on material, we've got some overhead, and we're going to end up with some profit. Now, everybody's metrics are different. That's why it's so important to have a budget. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure everybody understands how to win so that they see the importance of optimizing every component in the business. Go ahead, Mike.
Excellent. So moving on from financial, and by the way, that's been such a way to engage people in all the companies I've worked for with Mark, is his not just transparency about the numbers, but his ability to communicate the numbers in a way that then makes sense to everybody. And in every company we have, it's not only been something that I've personally gotten a lot out of, but it's probably the biggest feedback from my team that I've heard that they appreciate, being engaged and transparent enough about our numbers so that people can go out and try to make those things happen. Because ultimately, I think that's what good people want to do. Next up, we're going to look at operations metrics. And again, we're going to split those down between the two categories. We got leading metrics, things that we're going to do to make this thing better. And we got lagging metrics, things that are telling us whether we're succeeding. So leading metrics from an operations side, we looked at some of them in the budget, right? Field labor ratio and equipment ratio, so targets for how much we should be spending on labor and equipment compared to revenue. Those are two really good things that we're setting out a plan for with the budget. It's leading because you can actually plan for these with the budget, and then that informs you how to pay your staff, how much equipment you can afford, how to do that as things are changing. So to Mark's example there that he just threw up, if I'm going to grow by 100,000, well, you've got a pretty good idea of how much you can afford to spend on labor, equipment, materials, and subs to get you there. So those ratios really help us plan for a successful growth or contraction in some cases, but ideally growth, and make sure that we are like a year ahead before our results. Because if we do that growth and we hit those ratios, you're going to be profitable. It's way easier than doing it and hoping we're going to be profitable or waiting till the end of the year to find out if we are profitable. Another big operations metric, that's a leading indicator, is our estimated versus actual hours. Now, this one's interesting because it could be both. Obviously, at the end of a job, we're looking at this. But where we see a lot of value here is the estimate versus actual hours during a job. So being able to, on a project, construction project, for example, letting the crew know exactly where they stand in terms of what's been estimated and what's been used to date, or in a maintenance contract scenario with as the season transpires each week, they see that estimated versus actual number getting closer and closer together, but that they can govern how much time they're spending. They can also raise red flags. You know, if we're done a third of the year, but we've used up more than half the hours, that could very well be a case of a problem. It could be somewhat normal too. I mean, some places you've got a lot of spring cleanup and it normalizes itself. So it's really good for you to plan week by week or even end of month by end of month where you expect to be by estimate versus actual hours, so that then the people that are actually out in the field doing and leading the work can take accountability and responsibility for making sure we're hitting those hours and communicate when we're not, which is also super important. On the
We had a
lag, oh, yeah.
good question. Mike came in on the chat. The definition between leading and lagging metrics. This one's really important that everybody's really clear. And, you know, definitions by dictionary sometimes almost baffle us. But the truth is, it's just this simple. What we're doing with leading metrics is we're trying to figure out if we make this one thing happen every day, then when we get our result at the end of the year, it's going to be a good result. And so I really like to just simplify definitions like that. A leading indicator is what's the one thing that we can measure every day that if happens every day and it happens properly, at the end of the year, we're going to get the result that we want. And so I'll boil it down to profit, because all things that we do throughout the year lead to either a profit or a loss. Now, leading indicators here, like estimated versus actual hours, are really the big thing that we can impact every day that give us that lagging result. So if every day we bid our jobs properly and we put enough hours in the estimates, and then every day we go out and actually achieve the estimated versus actual hours, then at the end of the year, our lagging result, which is profit, will be where we want it to be. And so the leading indicator is, did we estimate with enough hours? Then did we actually get the work done within those hours? And if that happens consistently all year, then we end up with the profit that we were expecting. And this is why having a balanced scorecard is so important, is we want to create a balanced scorecard where, yeah, we spell out what we expect our profit to be at the end of the year. But most importantly, we want to make sure that the frontline staff who are outperforming the work understand that their balanced scorecard is really, hey, I've got 10 hours to go do this work today. And if I get it done within 10 hours, I'm doing my part for a profitable year. And so the leading indicators roll right up to the lagging indicators, which are the company results. Hopefully that helps fill in the blanks on that one question. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, really good explanation. And that's exactly it. And it's also good to note that some things can be leading and lagging, and those things are really powerful. Estimate versus actual hours is something we can watch every day. So on the right-hand side is crew efficiency score. It actually can be leading and lagging. Every day, we want to hit a crew efficiency. So for those who don't know what crew efficiency score is, crew efficiency score is measuring the amount of time that crews are on jobs producing revenue and on the time clock, so getting paid, versus the time they're on the time clock getting paid, not on jobs producing revenue. So for example, if we're not estimating loading trucks in the morning, unloading trucks at night, drive time, that is non-revenue generating producing time. And so that would be that would come off our crew efficiency. Time on jobs that's being estimated and generating revenue would be efficient time. And so a crew efficiency score is literally the revenue producing time or hours in a day divided by their total time in the day, which is another way of saying what percent of their day are they spending on jobs generating revenue. And that's another number you can get simply out of time tracking software. LMN puts it right on the timesheet screen, right on the crew's timesheet every single day when they submit it, so that they're constantly focused on maximizing the time that they spend while getting paid earning revenue. And then that's going to help them generate more revenue, which is going to help our bottom line, which is, to Mark's thing, the ultimate lagging metric is net profit, right? Basically, that's what a lot of this is boiling down to. But we don't want to oversimplify, because telling a crew you need to maximize net profit isn't useful enough for them. Sure, it's obvious, but what do I need to do every day? Well, the leading indicators, and in some cases, the leading/lagging indicators, are the things they need to do every day to make that net profit come reality. And so other lagging indicators for knowing whether our operations are good would be things like job cost variance. Are we within the right tolerance level for our job costs? Are we at or below what we estimate our jobs to be when we're job costing actuals? Is our crew efficiency score what we think it is? So if we have a certain percentage of unbillable time that we need to factor in, is our crew efficiency score, though, overall better than that time? Or is it more than that time that we're accepting is somewhat inefficient? Training would be part of a crew efficiency score, right? That is not necessarily revenue producing time and stuff we want to plan for, but also not generating revenue. And then on the last one, there would be the on-time job completion rate. Again, if we're completing jobs on time, operations is doing its job. And that will then trickle down all the way to, for example, a larger metric like net profit. Moving forward here to the third area is people. And so we're looking now at some objectives for people. Each one of these, it's important to understand too that overall, as a company, you're probably trying to maximize net profit. There are certainly other things, but that would be a big one. But within each one of the categories on the balanced scorecard, there are objectives. And some of those objectives you all were surfacing in the chat when you were putting together things you want to do this year. I want to build better staff accountability. I want to grow more internal leaders. I want to expand the people. And so inside the people metrics, and in fact, inside each one of these metrics, financial, operations, people, you're going to have some objectives. If I flip to the scoreboard, the balanced scoreboard, inside the people objectives, for example, could be, here's 3 examples, right? I need to develop leaders better. I need to improve our retention, and I need to engage and motivate the staff that I have in a better way. So then we apply the SMART goals to that. That would be something that you could enter in that chat GPT and get good goals. And then the result would be examples like we have on the screen. These could be goals that we could actually track in a balanced scorecard approach to make sure that we're achieving those objectives, like ENPS. ENPS score is a measure of how many staff would recommend your company as a place to work. Get into how that's calculated in a deeper webinar one day, but it's a great metric to see like how happy our people are that currently work for you. Training completion rate is a good metric. Now, ENPS in itself won't necessarily say you're not going to have any turnover or you're going to develop better leaders, but it is a great leading indicator. If people are happy at your work, then chances are you're going to have less turnover, and chances are you're going to have better leaders moving up through the system. And if those 2 things are happening down the road, chances are we're going to have better profit and better efficiency. So we've got ENPS as a leading indicator, training completion rate as a leading indicator. So are the staff enrolled in training, and are they completing it at a rate we decide is sufficient? And perhaps what's our overhead to field ratio, like we looked at in the budget? These are things that we can plan for and then set up at our company at the beginning of the year. Lagging indicator could be something like employee retention. So measuring our turnover in a year as a percentage of our total workforce, that's a good number to know. To Mark's point, not a leading indicator. It's already too late. They're gone. But a good lagging indicator to let us know whether our leading indicators are driving the successful outcomes that we're hoping for. Another lagging indicator would be accident or incident rate. If our training is having a meaningful impact, a good leading indicator would be we need our crews to take training. A good lagging indicator would be, is our accident or incident rate down or at 0 or whatever our target is. Anything to add there, Mark?
No, I think the big overlook for most companies here is just oftentimes we're looking at metrics like employee retention or accident metrics, but we're not actually thinking, hey, what are we doing to make them better? And that's why the leading indicators are so important. We want to set targets for the leading indicators so that we systematically make the lagging indicators better. We know that if we're doing training and if our employees are happy, they're going to stick around and we're going to be more productive and we're going to have fewer accidents. And so it's really just using the leading indicators as the guideposts to seeing the results that we're really looking for at the end of the year.
And ultimately, when we get into the balanced scorecard at the crew lead level, you're going to see now how the crew lead associates things like training completion with the outcomes that we're all trying to achieve, whether it ties back to employee turnover or whether it ties back to profitability and incentives around there.
Exactly.
The last section that we're going to take a look at examples for is the customer section. And so again, leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators could be things like qualified leads in our pipeline. Note there the word qualified. So not necessarily just leads in the pipeline, but leads in the pipeline that have defined to be the right customer fit for our company. And that I'm sure we'll get into deeper in other webinars, and Mark's posted a lot of stuff about creating a really good lead qualification system, as well as the next point, an ideal customer profile. And I think I saw somebody in the chat also talking about their ICP, which is great. Ideal customer profiles are descriptions of customers who fit our ideal profile for our company. And depending on the kind of work you do, it could be a commercial property service or a commercial property. It also could be high-end residential person, but it's identifying who it is that we want to sell to, because they are most likely to give us the jobs that are aligned with our budget, revenue goals, profitability goals, etc. And so two good leading indicators for customer metrics might be, are we getting the right leads in? And do we have a percentage of leads who achieve or meet our ideal profile? Lagging indicators on the customer side could be things like CSAT scores, which is customer satisfaction, surveys to our customers to say, are you happy with us? NPS, a net promoter score from a customer. And then ultimately, one of the biggest lagging indicators would be a renewal rate. How many of our customers at the end of the year are choosing to stay with us because we're providing the value and the services that we promised?
So ultimately, as you can see, we've kind of gone through these 4 key sections. We can move forward, Mike. We've gone through these 4 key sections because it gets really difficult for most companies to take that company level strategy and to break it down into KPIs that actually resonate with the frontline staff. And so each week throughout the year, we're going to talk about one of the 4 perspectives, and we're going to talk about these KPIs. We're going to teach you how to use these KPIs. And most importantly, we're going to teach you how to make them actionable so that you and everybody in your company can speak a common language that truly really puts a common lens on the business. This way, the owner has a true understanding of the 4 components of the business, but so does everybody else. And when we're having meetings each week, we're actually talking about the same metrics, and we're talking about the SMART goals that we're going to use to improve in each area. So we've thrown a lot at you this week. We know that we've thrown lots of acronyms and KPIs that you might not be comfortable with. And all we're asking for is a little trust in the sense that if you're part of the accelerator program, 1 week at a time, we're going to go extra deep into each one of these areas. And we're going to give you some simple tools and frameworks to deploy in your company at the scale you're at. We're not going to be using a one size fits all because we know that doesn't work. If you're a smaller startup, we're going to have you implement a few basic things in your business. If you're, a more advanced enterprise company, you're probably more familiar with some of the key terms that we're talking about, and you're going to have a little bit more to implement. But obviously, we're going to try to make it doable for everybody. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create KPIs or key performance indicators that relate to each team member in your company, so that the balanced scorecard just becomes that scoreboard that is a result of everything that's happening in the business. We can jump ahead there, Mike. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create some monthly and quarterly check-ins using the meeting framework that we've given you. And again, the scoreboard becomes the dashboard. The scoreboard is what we talk about in our quarterly and monthly meetings, so that we can say, here's the SMART goals that we've put in play, and here's the improvements that we're seeing. We want it to be measurable. And so we want those measurable results to be relevant at each level of the company. And for that reason, we have a balanced scorecard for the crew leaders, the managers, the departments, and the company, so that everybody has a metric that ultimately rolls up to a better year for everybody in the company. We can hop ahead there, Mike. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create data sets that drive results. Now, we want that data to be relevant to each person. So the frontline crews, we want them to be concerned about their crew score. We want them to be concerned about estimated versus actual hours. But we don't want them to be overly fixated on every other component of the business. And so we build a balanced scorecard that resonates with them. And then each manager has one that resonates with their role, so that they're doing the things that they need to do to contribute to that overall flow in the company. So the company is just continuously improving without there being, maybe some laggards or some areas of the business that just aren't getting the attention that's needed. We can jump ahead. So the KPIs are just giving us the opportunity to review different parts of the business. We're just going to be able to look at each piece of the business, and we're going to have an accountability framework. So every KPI is owned by somebody in the company. And over the next month, what we're going to do is help you build out your balanced scorecard with an accountability framework, and really make it so that you understand your balanced scorecard, you understand all of the drivers and all of the things that you need to be doing in your business to actually improve the 4 perspectives in a way where the business can continue to scale. Because that's often where a lot of people really get confused. They think of KPIs and there's too many for one person. We're really trying to create a framework that's very easy to follow for every individual in the company. So ultimately, what we're trying to do here is find a way where everybody can see the balanced scorecard for what it is. And what we want to do is show you one right now, just to kind of wrap your head around what that would look like for a crew leader. We know that the company has a balanced scorecard with the revenue and the revenue per hour and the gross profit and lots of other metrics. We just want each crew lead to have their version, and the addition of all of those balanced scorecards rolls up to a department or to an entire company, depending on the size of the company. And ultimately, the concept here is pretty simple. The sum of all of its parts equal the whole. And so when we build out a balanced scorecard for a crew leader, it looks like this. Ultimately, we're going to give them a revenue target for the year. We're going to let them know what that revenue per hour will look like and what the gross profit margin is that they're working toward. Then we're going to make sure that they understand their budget, their field labor ratio. And then all we want to do is make sure that they have perspective on whether their staff are finishing up training. We want to make sure that they have ENPS numbers so they understand if their crew is happy or not. And we want to make sure that they understand our customer satisfaction. And so we're talking about the metrics that the whole company needs to improve, right down to people at the crew lead level. So again, this is just one example. There'd be one for a manager, one for anybody that runs a department. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody understands that we're actually trying to improve the business across these 4 perspectives, that our customers are important, that our people are important, that efficiency is how we win. And ultimately, we want the company to understand the financial metrics well enough to continue to evolve and work on different components of the business. I think we can jump back into the slides there, Mike. As you approach this, what we really want to explain over the 50-week program, week to week, we're going to talk about one perspective of this balanced scorecard, and we're going to talk about the metrics, and we're going to explain how to get the metrics from LMN, from QuickBooks, or in some cases from another source like an employee survey. But most importantly, what we're actually talking about is how to make these metrics better. What is it that drives revenue per employee? What is it that really changes the efficiency rate? How do we get the crew score to go from 85 to 94? What drives the customer experience? Why is the customer survey coming back a little bit negative? Or why are we finding that we're short on staff? Why is it that we've got a high employee turnover? We want to optimize the activities that create better SMART goals and better day-to-day operations in the business. And so we don't want you to have to overthink that. So what we've done is we've built a whole library of standard operating procedures, assessments, frameworks, and tools that you can deploy each week to drive the improvements that we're talking about. So again, 1 week we're going to talk about the financial perspective. Then we're going to move on and talk about developing people. We're going to talk about efficiency, and we're going to talk about optimizing that customer experience. And so some examples of what we'd be doing when we're talking about financial outcomes, we're trying to teach you how to use a budget, how to really use the metrics to tell a story. But then in those other following 3 weeks, when we're talking about the employees and growing people, we're talking about deploying a standard way of doing that. That's a training program, that's job descriptions, that's better hiring documents, better job ads, better hiring process, creating a funnel to get better employees. Those actionable insights are where we're going to really focus our time. So, talking about using a balanced scorecard, that's a method of tracking continuous improvement. What we really want to focus on each week, and what you'll see that we're focused on as part of this 52-week program, it's us really focusing on what systems, what framework, what standard operating procedure do you need to deploy in order to optimize the business in one of those 4 areas. So we know that when you follow this program throughout the year, every month you're doing something to optimize one of the 4 perspectives, the business is just continuously improving. And that's really where becoming a market leader happens. It doesn't happen from hyperfixating on one area or another. It's really improving every component of the business. So we need the dashboard to be able to measure it. But what we're really trying to do is optimize the activities and the initiatives that we're doing to improve our people, to improve our customer experience, to get more and more efficient 1 week, 1 day at a time by actually deploying standard operating procedures and improvements in the business that drive the outcomes. This balanced scorecard, this whole exercise today of introducing it, is just meant to help you understand why we need a balanced scorecard. We're going to use it as a point of reference in almost every conversation, and it does become that sort of guiding principle to your continuous improvement program, because you're always looking at those metrics as being your benchmark, where you are today and where you're headed tomorrow. But we're going to really double down on using the leading indicators to drive improvements in the business 1 week at a time. Mike, was there another? Yeah. So a big component of this is this implementation concept. Over the course of a year, we're implementing change. This is really important that you understand this. We're not going to overwhelm anybody. We know what that feels like. We've certainly been growing businesses for years, and we've taken on too much ourselves in the past. What we're really trying to do is simplify a continuous improvement program, put it into bite-sized pieces where every week there's something big changing. Now, for this week, if you haven't already, What we really want you to do is we want you to finalize your budget. If you need some help with that, reach out. We'll help you out with that. We want you to set up a meeting cadence like the one that I showed earlier from Lucky Landscaping. Let's commit to a meeting cadence that actually allows you and your team to get together and continuously improve. And let's open up the budget, or sorry, let's open up the scorecard and get your scorecard started this week. Now, again, if you need some help, get on the schedule with one of our guides. They're there to help. They'll connect you up with some advisors, and they're going to help point you in the direction of the right people that can actually help you with budgeting or setting up any of the systems that we ever mention on any of these weekly calls. We really want to make it as simple as possible. Now, if you need some help, you can join the community for free if you're not already in there, or you can schedule a free assessment right from this QR code, and then you can register for the last free webinar, which is this Wednesday. So we'll be going through the third framework that's foundational this Wednesday, and then we're launching right into the weekly action items as part of this continuous improvement program. And then it's pay to play. So if you're here and you're joining us for a bit of an overview today, thanks for joining. If you're interested in coming on to the program, the 50-week accelerator program is officially starting next Wednesday, this first month. We've been laying the foundation really by creating awareness around what a balanced scorecard is, what SMART goals are, how to go through a business assessment to create some good SMART goals, and how to deploy a meeting cadence that actually becomes the delivery mechanism of a continuous improvement program like LeanScaper. We're going to jump right into the 50-week continuous improvement program and start rolling out all of those improvements next week. So again, thanks for joining here this week. We're going to take a few questions right now. We'll run over a little bit for anyone that has some big questions, but otherwise, thanks for joining and look forward to seeing you again this Wednesday. We're going to roll our sleeves up and get right into the nuts and bolts of things each week this month. Also, anybody with any unanswered questions, great point. Tony's here with me as always. Tony just pointed out, feel free to go into the community, throw your questions in there. Our guides are in there regularly. We're making a huge effort to create a really dynamic community. So any questions that you've got, go ahead and push those in there. If you need any information about the 50-week accelerator program, the pricing is on the website. If you've got any really specific questions, go ahead and book a meeting with one of our guides. They'll be happy to walk you through what we're going to cover on a little bit larger view and explain how the costs work of joining us for this continuous improvement program. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.